IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Tuesday, Ryan, and it is move on time, right? Notre Dame is 1-0, and now we kind of turn the page a little bit into week one of college football playoff, which is game two. It's going to drive me nuts all year. So this is game two for Notre Dame, and it's a bit of an interesting game, Ryan. Notre Dame moves back, comes back home, comes back to the States, back to sovereign land here in the United States of America, and they're going to square off against Tennessee State this weekend. Obviously, Tennessee State is an HBCU school in the FCS level from Tennessee. It's a very interesting story. Eddie George is their running back, is their head coach, the former Ohio State running back, Marcus.
They
Freeman
wish he was. They wish he was the running back as well. But yes,
I don't know if you've seen pictures of him lately, but he looks like he could still play running back at the college level.
Yes.
Obviously, Marcus Freeman, also an Ohio State grad. First time Notre Dame's ever played an FCS school. We'll chat a little bit about that, more so in the mailbag section, because there's some comments on it. So we'll save that to respond to the comments. But when you have a game like this, Ryan, this is an FCS school that is not a very good FCS school, if we're just being honest. Coach George is going into his third season at Tennessee State, and they have gone 5-6 and 4-7. Did have a couple competitive losses last year, but they weren't very good. So what this game is for Notre Dame, Ryan, it's more about you, right, as a program. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what we want to see from Notre Dame this week, and then we'll dive into Tennessee State as well, because we do want to be respectful to them. There's some things you and I like about what Tennessee State's doing, some position groups that have some pretty good players and some opportunities for some younger guys to step into the lineup. They've got, it's an interesting situation, and there's some things about what they're doing coaching wise we like, and some other things that are kind of leave us scratching our heads a little bit. So we'll dive into all that, Ryan. But first of all, for Notre Dame, this is a great opportunity for you to learn a lot about yourself as a program from a focus and leadership standpoint. And that's what this week is going to be about. There's a lot of things that Notre Dame needs to do coming out of this weekend. There is nothing that they can do. They could win 70-0, and it doesn't say, oh, gee, Notre Dame's going to be a title team this year. There's nothing that they can do from a result standpoint that's going to move the needle. But looking at it from a football coach, Ryan, there's a lot you can get out of this week from a where are we mentally, where are we from a preparation standpoint, where are we from a leadership standpoint, where are we from a focus standpoint. And those are things that we're going to find out where that team is and their ability to say, hey, look, it doesn't matter who the opponent is. This isn't a week off. This isn't a get everybody rest standpoint. We're in week two, game two. Sure. We're ready to rock and roll. I think that at the very top of this conversation, we'll have a lot more to talk about, but at the very top of this conversation, Ryan, the leadership and the focus of this team is going to be tested this week when you look at the opponent that's in front of them, because they're not very good.
No, they're not. And obviously we'll dive into the good parts of Tennessee State, but I mean, you're right, Brian. Like, we're not going to sit here and blow smoke and say that, this is a great battle for Notre Dame and a great test. It's not. You just had a decisive victory over Navy last weekend. This is more about, in my opinion, stacking good performances, stacking them and taking care of business on a week-to-week basis. I mean, for me personally, the best part of what I loved about Notre Dame last week, outside of just seeing some of the younger players and some of the players in general be able to take advantage of opportunity, was I thought that the coaching side of Notre Dame football was on full display last weekend. Like, I really thought that the teams were crisp. They had it seemed like a more increased understanding of what was expected of them. They were breaking huddles quick. They were lining up quickly. They were getting plays off. I mean, there was only one play last week on offense where Notre Dame had to take a late timeout because the play clock was winding down and they just weren't set with what they wanted to do offensively. So things were crisp. And I think that the team had clearly bought in to the preparation going into that football game. Now, coming back after some success, there's a twofold thing for me. One is I want to see a little bit of the same stuff I saw from the coaches last week. Preparation and making sure that every player has a firm understanding of what the expectation is and get to the line crisp and understand what your assignment is. That's first and foremost. The second part, though, Brian, to your point, is I think leadership is something that we really need to harp on this team, because we have seen the juice this season already a little bit in the first game. You saw it in the preseason. But now I really want to see, can the leadership and the intrinsic motivation come out of this team, right? Because Marcus Freeman and his staff can do everything that they can to try to get this team to super focus and like, guys, like don't take this team lightly and do all their rah-rah type of things on the sideline and before the game. But at the end of the day, the players also have to be accountable for that as well, right? As far as like Sam Hartman needs to lead by example and say like, guys, like we're not letting up. We're going to bury this team. Then we're going to move on to the next week. But we can't have to make sure that we bury them first. So I think just buying in to the full process is a big thing. Coaches have to show that they have full control like they did last week. Everything's crisp. Everything is business as usual. And the players need to buy into like, hey, guys, this might not be the best team of all time, but let's work hard for these next couple hours, dominate them, and then we can move on to a tougher opponent next week in NC State. So I really think that Notre Dame has a great opportunity to show that the coaches have their imprint on this program and the players have intrinsic motivation to say, I can be laser focused and I can take care of business on a week-to-week basis. This is about stacking good weeks of football for Notre Dame. And that's the opportunity they have in front of them.
Because Coach Freeman has said this is a process-driven situation. This is about us. And that's the thing is, what's your challenge this week? Your challenge isn't necessarily Tennessee State. Your challenge is we're going to go out and do what Notre Dame is supposed to do on Tuesday. We're going to go out and play and practice the way that Notre Dame is meant to practice on Wednesday because our goal is to get better today. And when there are let-ups in practice because of the opponent, as a coach, you have to go crazy on them. I mean, you just do. And we've heard the stories about how Lou Holtz was, Ryan, when it came to really focusing on the bad teams. You did not like being in practice when Notre Dame was playing somebody bad because they were just going to be all over you. And that's the reality of kind of where they are right now in this breakdown. Is it's look, your leadership, guys, this isn't about Tennessee State. This is about us. So if you're not going out there today getting better today, then you're hurting us. I don't care about Tennessee State. I don't care about any of that. And that's what we said. That's where that leadership part comes in, because you can learn. If Notre Dame just kind of goes out there and sleepwalks through a 48-3 victory, that this team took a step back in my eyes, right? And that's the key: is no let up, no steps back. At the end of the day, the score doesn't matter as much. Again, Notre Dame could not play very well and still blow Tennessee State out, Ryan. Let's be honest about that. But does that really make you a better football team? That's the question.
Exactly. I mean, I felt similarly, Brian, because like UNLV is a much better team than what Tennessee State is, for instance. But Notre Dame sleptwalked through that game, right? Like they did not play well at all during that football game. Did anybody leave the UNLV game last year and think to yourselves, like, Notre Dame is a better football team after that opponent? Like I didn't, right? So I do think that there was a process that could be built in stacking good weeks, right? Continuing to build momentum. And then also, this is the number one game in the entirety of the season for young players potentially to get some reps as well, right? So like not only do Sam Hartman and the starters, like the starting level players, need to come out and win just to show or have a dominant performance because it shows that they are just believing in that process, but also like, hey, like Steve Angeli getting some reps would be cool, right? Like Kenny Minchie maybe getting a couple snaps would be pretty cool. Like a couple of these younger players that they weren't able to play last week against Navy, be cool if Brendan Vernon could get some burn. Maybe a Braylon James could get some burn. Like some of these younger guys that we're excited about. But I really think it's just about taking care of business, man. Like this is a business trip at the end of the day. It's fun to play football, and we all have that intrinsic motivation of wanting to play ball and having fun on Saturdays. But it's also kind of a overarching mission that you're on this year, right? And I mean, Brady Quinn said that he thought this was the best Notre Dame team he's ever seen, right? In order for them to be that type of team, though, you need to be able to take advantage of every single challenge that's in front of you, and that's what this is.
Because the best teams aren't focused as much. Brian, I've said this a million times on this show, to you, in chats, on Twitter, whatever. I don't care about results when I'm looking at it from a head coaching standpoint. The result doesn't say anything. Nick Saban made a great comment the other day. And I'm trying to remember specifically how he said it, but he talked about there's a difference between beating a team and like, I can't remember the word he used, but it was something like really whipping a team, right? And he's like, there's a difference.
Dismantling or something like that.
It's because we've seen Nick Saban go off after convincing wins. And you're just like, what's this dude mad about? Because he looked at something and said, that's not Alabama football.
Right.
That's not Alabama football. And we're not going to win in 3 weeks when we got to play that 2019 LSU team if we're going through the motions here, right? We saw this with Ohio State last year, Ryan. Incredibly talented team. After the Notre Dame game, they just kind of went through the motions, went through the motions against Penn State. I mean, honestly, if it wasn't for a couple heroic performances, that's a different ball game. I mean, JT going absolutely off on defense. Like, they sleptwalked through that game. They sleptwalked through the Maryland game, and they thought they could just turn the light on against Michigan, and they couldn't. And Michigan smacked them in the mouth. And so it's you are who you are. And if your DNA is we're this as a team, then you're not going to live up to expectations. But if you're a team that has the focus of, hey, we have a goal at hand, and this team is standing in front of that, between us and that goal. I don't care what their helmet says. I don't care what their record is. I don't care who their coach is. I care about going out there and dominating. Sure. And so I'm going to do what I need to do on Tuesday to dominate. I'm going to do what I need to do on Wednesday because I don't care about the opponent. And that's what we're going to learn. Does Notre Dame have that mindset as a football team? And, it doesn't mean they have to be perfect from an execution standpoint. It is still just game 2. There's going to be misses and mistakes and things like that. But it's more about what we talked about against Navy, Ryan. We said the same thing last week. I don't care about the score as much. I care about how they go about their business. Well, guess what? Notre Dame came out fired up, passionate, flying all around. When I broke the game down again on defense, Ryan, I said, man, there's actually a lot of, I don't say a lot like it's a bad thing, but there was a lot more mistakes than I thought there were when I watched it live. Sure. But you know why I didn't hurt them? Because they were playing 100 miles an hour.
Yes.
And they were hitting and battling. And so the talent carried the day, and they dominated a not very good Navy team, right?
That's fine.
And so exactly. You nailed it, right? It's the buy-in. It's the buy-in to, but what's the buy-in to? The process and each other. And this is just another step to that. And so we're going to learn about this team's leadership. Again, it's not so much the execution that I care as much about. There's going to be mistakes because honestly, Ryan, the execution, that's where the bad opponent can kind of maybe mess with you a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, there's a little bit of that. But as long as it's that same fire, that physicality, because that's just who you are. You're either a physical team or you're not. You're either a team that loves playing together or you don't. You just don't turn it on for the big games because you can't do that.
Yep.
And that's what we're going to learn about this Notre Dame team. I mean, I'm confident they're going to, Ryan, just because of the way that they went about business last week. But that's the learning opportunity the growth opportunity that's in front of Notre Dame.
I think it all comes back to that swagger that I always talk about, right? Like that subtle confidence. Some people would call it cockiness, depending on it, right? But like, there's been years, Brian, and I'm not going to single out any one year, but like, there's been some years where I'm like, Notre Dame's really talented, but I just think they're all a bunch of nice kids, right? Who just don't have like that subtle swagger to them of like, I'm going to kick your butt, man. Like at the end of the day, and you need that. And I honestly, like, the reason I'm buying in so heavy to this 2023 version is I think Sam Hartman has that, right? Like, I think he has it. I think Audric Estime has that. I think that there are several defensive players that have that. It's like, there's just some guys on this team that just Jason Anye, even though he's just, a rotational defensive lineman, like they have that in them, which is why I feel different about this 2023 version of Notre Dame potentially, because it's never been about talent. It's been about that internal drive to be the best that you possibly can be. And some years I feel like it's been missing a little bit at certain spots for Notre Dame. This year, I feel like it's kind of in droves a little bit as far as like, I really think that Notre Dame believes this year. Like, it seems like they believe, right? Like purposeful was the word that I come back to after that first week. Like everything they did was intentional and purposeful against Navy. Like it looked like they believed in what they were doing. Can they come out against a lesser opponent in back-to-back weeks and say, we don't care who we're playing. We are going to believe in this process. We're going to buy in, and we are going to come out here intentional and take care of business. That's what I want to see, because I think the buy-in is high on this team right now.
We heard a lot last year, Ryan, about this team thinks it's confident. This team thinks it's really good and all that, but it wasn't backed up by how they went out and played, because you didn't have the leadership in place to live that out. That was the problem. You didn't have the leadership in place because your veterans weren't always your best leaders last season. I think that's something that's changed a little bit because, look, like you said, you can talk about it. I don't know many Notre Dame teams in recent years that didn't walk into the season talking about, oh, we're going to be good and
Sure.
all that kind of stuff. But one thing I'll say is a couple sources that I had that were a little concerned about some aspects of last year's team and weren't sure that they were going to be as good as maybe some other people thought. This year have been complete 180s from the standpoint of this team is just different.
Right.
But these are the games where you learn that. Another bit about that. Not that you learn that, like that's a bit too far, but you learn more about whether they have that, right? And that's what I want to see from this team. And there's other things, Ryan, like that are parts of this matchup. Number one is you want to build on your game one success, right? Continue to get your pass game rolling. There's going to be parts of your pass game that, last week you didn't maybe get to as much. There's some concepts that you want to get to. There's some opportunities to get better. Your defense is going to be going against a more traditional offense, a traditional spread offense. What are the adjustments that you make there? You've got a defensive tackle down in your rotation who played pretty good in the opener, right? And so, you're going to have to figure out what your rotation is like after that. There are some players that I thought lost a little bit of focus against Navy. Okay, now challenge them in the week of practice. Hold them accountable during the week of practice. Those are all different aspects of things that we are going to learn about this football team, but also opportunities that are in front of this football team to go out and perform. And we're going to find out if they're able to go out and do that. But those are the things I think are in front of it. And I think what I like about the way the schedule sets up, Ryan, is if they handle business, these first two games are tremendous opportunities for them to build depth. That's a big thing for me.
100%. Yeah. I mean, because we talk about, Notre Dame playing 5 running backs the first game, but like, Brian, I would think of it like this. Would Notre Dame have been able to play 5 running backs in the opener if they were playing against Ohio State, for instance, right? Would they have been able to do that? Probably not. Maybe 3 instead of the 5.
Would they have played Rico as much? Right?
Would 9 guys have caught a pass against Ohio State is the question. Would
in week 1
5 guys touch the ball at running back? Yeah, exactly. I mean, would some of the defensive players that we saw, would they be getting additional reps, as far as, I mean, even you're even able to get Clarence Lewis a couple reps at safety during the game, which was fantastic.
Was that in the second half?
Right? Yeah, it was in the second half. I remember seeing him. I almost texted you about it because I was like, number 6 is definitely as a too high safety right now. Like, that is happening right now.
Because I want to go back and look at that. I was watching through the game again, and I'm through the first half now, and he was corner the whole time.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, I was like, did they just like roll him high and they had the safety down, or did they have 2 corners in the game? So I was curious about that.
I think they had 3 linebackers in the game, and he was just one of the 2 high safeties. I could be wrong about that, but
I just was wondering if like maybe he was back and they had a safety down. Because I know they did that a couple times on the first half where they had DJ Brown down and they had a cornerback. So I'll get to that. But I mean, look, that'd be great if you can get him a chance to maybe get some more snaps there.
Yeah.
Could you have played Jason Onye as much as you played him if you were playing Ohio State? Is that really how you want to get his feet wet, is against that? So it's a great opportunity for that as well, Ryan. And you're going to, if they handle business, you're going to see some guys play this week that didn't play last week. Because the reality is if you're going to redshirt a guy, Ryan, do you really want to play him in your first 2 games of the year? Because now your margin for playing him the rest of the way is not great. Yep. So you're going to get opportunities to play these kids, and so those are different aspects of it that I want to see, and things that we're going to learn about this football team. So the building depth piece is to me a great opportunity. It really is.
I mean, because we've talked about a lot of position battles, but it's been a lot more for depth than like second string opportunities, right? Like we talked about like the quarterback battle for like the longest time this offseason because we knew that Sam Hartman was going to be the starter. But these are the types of games where you might get to see a little bit more Steve Angeli. Maybe you get Kenny Minchie in the fold and you can really see kind of that game reps. And then also, at the end of the day, guys, like we always talk about, trust is built in a lot of different ways, right? Like from the practice field to the game field. But sometimes a coach doesn't really start trusting a player until they see him in live action. They're like, okay, he's ready. He's ready for this. Like this guy is ready now to take that step. And that is where depth is really created because it's not just about a guy looking the part in practice. Sometimes it's also about like, can he now translate this to a game day? That's a big question mark, right? So depth is built because the game reps matter so much, not only from just experience aspect for the player, but also for building that trust for a coordinator, for a position coach, like knowing that if it's a close game, like I can put Jeremiah Love in this football game at running back and like he'll play and he'll make plays and it's not going to take anything away from us. So I think that building of the trust is the big thing in these types of games as well.
And then how do some of these guys, Ryan, you and I have talked about this before. I mean, it's one thing to handle adversity. It's another thing to handle success. And how do you handle success? Because a week ago, everybody was doubting on Notre Dame. Oh, Notre Dame's not this. Notre Dame's not that. They're not able to do this. They're not able to do that. They don't have speed. They don't have this. I wonder about this. I wonder about that. And then look, now all of a sudden, Ryan, it's like, oh, they're a playoff team. They're this. They're that. We love Notre Dame now because they beat Navy. You know what I mean? And it's just like, well, okay, now everybody's feeling you a little bit. Do you still have that same attitude that you had last week? Or do you start feeling good about yourself now? Right? And I think that's another part of it too, is how does this team handle success? You mentioned like a Jeremiah Love and some of these young guys who went out and had success. Okay, well, how do they go out in game 2? Do they just kind of, those are the guys too, because here's something interesting, Ryan, is the depth on this team is still very young.
Yep.
And those are the guys that I'm more concerned about saying, this is Tennessee State or Notre Dame, right? How do they do that? How do the guards making their second start, do they have the same fire going into this game? Do the young freshman skill players and sophomore skill players have a similar mindset going into this game? And so it's actually the offense that I'm a little bit more curious about, not concerned, just curious, because there still are so many guys kind of stepping into new roles and kind of working in the rotation. And that's the part where I'm very curious, because I want to see the offense really build on the momentum they sustained last week. Like, I mean, dude, they were sharp last week,
they were
really sharp. And are they able to build on that? That honestly, Ryan, what I won't ask you, I don't really have any doubts that the defense is going to come out and be focused. I think that unit to me strikes me more as just that's who they are. The offense is the one that I'm still like, okay, you look great in week 1, but I still don't know who you are yet. Let me see how you do in week 2. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's the experience factor, I guess, right? I mean, you have a defensive coordinator that's in his second year and also has been a coach for a long time. You have a defense that has a lot of seniors on it. So, I mean, you talk about the 3 senior linebackers and Kaiser and Bertrand and Maris Loifal, but then you have Howard Cross, Riley Mills, Javante Jean-Baptiste. You have Cam Hart in the secondary. You have a lot of guys who have played a lot of football on the college level. So you have the senior aspect of it. You have a defensive coordinator that has been a coach in the college game a long time. And on the offensive side of the football, you have a first-year offensive coordinator and also a first-time starting quarterback at the University of Notre Dame who's only going to his second game. I know we're all super excited about Sam Hartman, but like he is only still going into his second football game. So there's still
at Notre Dame, right?
Yeah. So the maturation still happens there. And then of course, the young depth of wide receivers, young depth of running backs. So I'm not terribly concerned about it, but like certainly compared to the defense, there's a lot less reps that have been happening on the defense.
Yeah, it's not concerned. It's just a question. We're still learning about that side of the ball, right?
Sure.
And especially with the younger guys, but they look pretty good in week 1. Is that juice still there in week 2? Because like, how it is, man, you play football. It's that first game is you're just amped up because it's just that first game. Yep. And so it doesn't matter about the opponent. Well, game 2 is okay. I mean, are they amped up because it's the home opener? I'm not sure. We're going to learn something about this team. Something else. What are the things, Ryan, when you look at this offense, what are the things that you're going to see from this group that's going to say, okay, yeah, they are like defense. It's simple, right? Okay. Do your job, play hard, play fast, be disruptive, be disciplined. I mean, that's what we've seen from them all fall camp. It's what we saw from them in the spring. It's what we saw from them against Navy, right? Offensively, to me, it's like, okay, what are the things that we need to see from that group in game 2 that make us say, okay, this is just who they are. It wasn't that they were just hot against Navy. This is just who they are. This is their identity. What do you want to see from the Notre Dame offense? Because you said it's not that you're concerned. It's just we're going to learn about it. But what do you want to learn about this team? Like what could they do in this game against Tennessee State on offense that's going to make you say, yeah, this offense is going to follow their leaders and be a mature group as well and go out and handle business?
Well, I think before the offense, I think one thing that I am curious about defensively is that you are transitioning now from going to a more traditional offense from a triple option offense, right? So if I'm a younger player, especially, or just a player in general at Notre Dame that has been just kind of super laser focused on what their duties are playing the triple option, it's now kind of reprogramming yourself a little bit as far as like what now my keys are, playing against a traditional offense, which is just kind of interesting. I just think for offensively, it's more from like a play calling kind of strategy perspective more than anything, because I think the talent is there, obviously. I want to see what the approach is as far as diversity was a great thing that we saw in the first game, right? Like you saw some gap scheme, you saw some zone scheme, you saw a duo, you saw a bunch of things in the run game. And then offensively, like in the passing game, I thought there was some creative touches to that game as far as the play calling perspective. So is the strategy and the nuance of playing offense going to be at a high enough level? And if it is Notre Dame are they continuing to be consistent with it, right? In their approach and their execution? That's really all I want to see. Like if Rocco Spindler takes Terrell Allen 2 gaps to the left, right, in this football game, doesn't prove anything to me because he's a undersized defensive lineman, and that's what Rocco Spindler should do. But if Rocco is assignment sound and doing his, staying true to his technique, that's going to tell me a lot more about this offense. I think the buy-in on the offense is more what I want to see, not as much physical.
And that'll lead to him blowing up undersized players, right? I mean, that's the thing is like you and I were kind of going over their starting lineup. It's actually kind of funny. Their starting nose tackle is 6'3", 380 pounds. And his backup is 6'3", 305. But, their other D tackle, 6'1", 280. Their other defensive end, Terrell Allen, who you mentioned, we'll get into, 6 foot 275. And they have a guy that's a buck. It's like their Viper, right? Who's 6'4", 226. They're not very big, right? And so you could physically dominate them, and it doesn't tell you anything, right? What tells you something, to your point, is did they play assignment correct, disciplined football, and then obviously be physical within that. Something I'm curious about to see with this Notre Dame offensive staff is, are they a staff that understands we're going to need this guy and this guy down in future games to really be the team we want to be? So is this a game where they say, hey, we're going to really make sure that we get Tobias Merriweather some touches to get his confidence going? We're going to do some things with maybe a Chris Tyree to continue building his repertoire early in the game. Do you do some things with 2 backs? That's something I've always been curious about. It's not one of those things where you don't necessarily experiment in a game like this. I don't believe in that because you have to be true to who you are. But when you're putting your script together and you're putting your play calls together, do you have in mind, I got to get 5 going? Or I want to, we need to continue to build number 4 to this. Well, I really liked what we saw from our running backs. I want to see what maybe we can do out of some 2-back stuff, where maybe the pressure isn't as great if there is a mistake because it's something new. Those are things that I think you learn a little bit about it. Because what I've never liked in the past, can I tell you something? Of course I can. One of the biggest and the most annoying things that we've seen from Notre Dame in the past is in games like this, they would just kind of line up and just physically beat the other team up. And it's like, you didn't really make yourself better. You just kind of out-talented them. You took kind of the lazy way out. You just came out and just like, we know we can run this stuff. You can't do that in 2 weeks when you go to NC State. You can't do that in 4 weeks or whatever when Ohio State comes to town. I just don't want to see that. I don't want to see them getting cute and like doing reverses and throwbacks and silly stuff like that, but more of, this is part of who we are, but let's really emphasize this in this game because it's part of a building block that we're going to need down the road. So let's get some game reps at it. That's what I'm saying. I'm curious to see if we're going to see maybe a little bit of that from Jared Parker and the staff in this game.
Well, I think that's staying consistent to who you are as a staff, right, and as a program. Like I think that I think that the coaches that kind of draw back to that kind of scenario are more people that just don't have trust in their entirety of their team, right? Like they just trust a certain aspect. I mean, I kind of felt like that about Notre Dame. I mean, like even last year, it's like there was no trust in the passing game in Notre Dame last year. And some was coaching, some was not coaching. I mean, we've talked about that ad nauseum at this point. Like we know we can run the ball for the most part. We have a very good offensive line. We have a good running back room. We're just going to lean on that when times get tough. Well, I think that the great teams always have that, but then they also have multiple layers of things that they can rely on that make them a great team. Like, it's very hard to just be a super predictable offense in today's game and just be able to just run through good opponents consistently. Like, that's just not going to happen. I talked about this last week when we're talking about, you run for nearly 300 yards against Clemson, and then you have less than 100 against Navy, and then you run for like yeah. And then you run for around 100 against USC, and you don't run the ball very well in that football game. It's like that you're consistent because you're unpredictable.
Right.
Unpredictability brings that type of success. So I hope, and I do believe that it's probably going to be the case, but we won't know until it happens, obviously, with him being a first-year coordinator. But I think Jared Parker and the offensive side of the football is going to stick to what their identity is, right? Like, stick to what your identity is and understand that, like, we cannot be a one-trick pony offensively and expect to beat Ohio State, Clemson, USC's of the world and compete for a championship. We can't be that type of team. And I think that they're going to come out and be balanced. And plus, honestly, I don't think that – I think offensively, like, if I'm the staff, I'm like, we're still working out getting the wide receivers more confidence. We're still getting Sam Hartman acclimated to playing Notre Dame football in games. This might be a game where we want to try some stuff out, right? Like, it's a little bit of a test period. And I mean, you mentioned Tobias. Like, Notre Dame tried to get Tobias in early, and then obviously he drops the screen, and that just kind of goes haywire. So, yeah, I think this is a perfect opportunity to get Tobias some touches, to let him get to work, to build his confidence, and they continue to build the confidence because get the tight ends involved.
Yes, that's another one.
Football game. I mean, because every player pretty much for the most part on offense last week played well who had opportunities.
Even the tight ends, they never got pass game opportunities, but I thought Holden Stace and Mitchell Evans outside the one hole blocked really well in the game.
Yep. But getting them opportunities in different areas of the football game obviously will be big. Getting Tobias going and his confidence building. Then down the line, it's like, if I'm a defensive coordinator, who do I take away? I think that's the best thing about Notre Dame right now is, like, do they have a Will Fuller at wide receiver right now? They don't. But, like, if Tobias starts getting going and Jaden Thomas is doing his thing and Jaden Greathouse is doing his thing and Deion Coles is giving you good reps, it's like, defensively, who am I taking away? Like, you can't just sacrifice numbers to just appease an issue, right? Like, you're creating an issue when you just don't have an answer to, like, who's the go-to guy? I don't know who the go-to guy is going to be for Notre Dame. It could end up being Tobias. It could end up being...
It could change week to week.
Yeah, it could be Jaden Thomas. Like, it really could, depending on what the opponent is. So I think that unpredictability is the best thing Notre Dame has in its advantage right now offensively.
Yeah. Defensively, just do your job. You know what I don't want to see, Ryan, is I don't want to see kind of what we saw in 2015 when they played UMass. And they just the defense just kind of slept, gave up like that 80-yard touchdown. I want to see the defense just come out and just dominate Tennessee State.
Yep. I mean, that would be let's be honest about it, guys. Like, we're going to talk about the offensive side of the football. We're going to talk about the defensive side of the football for Tennessee State. But, like, the offensive, especially for Tennessee State, it's not a good unit. It's not. Yeah. And honestly, if Notre Dame gives up some points and some yards against Tennessee State, I'm a little.
Sometimes they weren't focused.
Questions. Yeah, I got some questions about that, right? I mean, because it's not a good offensive team. So, yeah, I mean, you need to come out and you need to dominate this type of opponent because it's not that you're a lot better than this team. It's that they're not even in the league with you. Like, they're not, honestly. Like, it's not I would say it like this, right? Like, there's going to be a couple opponents on the schedule this year that Notre Dame's going to play against. It's just like Notre Dame's just much more talented than they are. Like, right? Like, they're just not quite in that same tier of talent. Right. And then there is a situation where you're playing against Tennessee State where it's like, guys, you're not even in the same scale. Like, you're not on the same planet from a talent perspective. So
they get whipped by all 11 other teams that Notre Dame plays, Ryan. Every single 100%. Team on Notre Dame's schedule would whoop Tennessee State, Central Michigan, Navy, all of them. And that's no disrespect. There are some FCS opponents that Notre Dame, you'd be like, I'm a little bit more worried about this game than I am Central Michigan in 2 weeks.
Right.
If
Notre Dame had South Dakota State on the schedule, I'd be here telling you guys, like, they're a good team, man. Like, don't sleep off for that team.
Yeah, you're going to learn a lot more about your football team this week against South Dakota State, North Dakota State, teams like that. When James Madison was really rocking and rolling, you're going to learn a lot more about this than you will in 2 weeks against Central Michigan. I mean, that's just the reality of it. That's not what this is. This is not that team. This isn't that team. So, Ryan, that's a little bit about Notre Dame and what's at stake for Notre Dame. We'll dive into Tennessee next. But, hey, folks, before we do us a favor. Hit that like button if you haven't already done so. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. And if you listen via podcast platform, give us a 5-star review. So, Ryan, let's talk about Tennessee State. This is going to be year 3 for their head football coach, Eddie George. First coaching job ever, I believe. He might have done some volunteer work, but he was never a football coach before he got this job. And year 1, he inherited a team where they had won 5 games the 2 previous years, and I think 9 in the 3 previous years combined. So he didn't walk into a great situation. Went 5-6 in their first season and went 4-7 last year. As I mentioned, had a couple competitive losses, but also some. They went on the road, played Eastern Washington, who won a national championship 3-4. It's been longer than that now. It's been about 5-6 years. It doesn't feel that long, right?
Yeah.
Won a national championship within the last 10 years, and they battled them, right? I mean, it was a competitive game. Eastern Washington jumped on them early or jumped them on in the second quarter. Tennessee State battled back, and it was a competitive game. It was tied in the fourth quarter with less than 3 minutes left. And so, that was a competitive football game. They lost to Jackson State by 13 in a low-scoring game, 16-13. Only lost to Lane College by a point. Lost to Murray State 16-3. As Murray State, they're not as good as they used to be, correct? I don't think they're that good.
No.
Lost to UT Martin 20-3. So, they had some bad losses in there as well, but they were at least somewhat competitive on that level. But that they didn't play it very. I mean, they're not playing like there's some conferences where you'd be like, hey, if you're a 7-4 team in that conference, you're pretty good.
Right. They're the Ohio Valley Conference. They're not playing against the Missouri Valley or or CAA conference. Right. Like they're not playing those schools.
Right.
Like the Missouri Valley on a week-to-week basis. Like we mentioned South Dakota, North Dakota State, but like South Dakota is usually a good team. North Dakota is usually a good team. Northern Iowa, Southern Illinois. Like you're playing some good football teams on a week-to-week basis. The OVC, like you're not playing a lot of great teams typically.
When I was coming up, Ryan, it was actually North Dakota that was better than North Dakota State. Like when I was in college and when I first got into coaching, it was North Dakota that was playing for championships, not North Dakota State. So to your point, that league is very good, very good.
Yep.
So, again, not a great team, 4-7. They've got a decent amount of skill talent coming back on offense. They lost a lot of guys from their defense, but the guys that come back were for the most part, some of their better players. And we'll dive into that a little bit. So tough task for Eddie George, Ryan. Very tough task for Eddie George. They've got a lot of transfers the last couple of years. That's just kind of the nature of that. But they also have had some guys transfer out as well. We were kind of joking when we were going over it, like Kevon Pope. Remember the kid from Ohio State that just like walked off the field in the middle of the game? He started at linebacker for him last year. He's not there anymore. But they were an interesting team last year, Ryan. I'd say big picture, they were actually a pretty scrappy defense, which we'll dive into. Their offense has been a problem, and that's the side of the ball that we'll start on and spend a little bit of time on. They have they're actually most of their starting skill returns from last season, Ryan. Their starting quarterback comes back, Draylon Ellis. He's back. Last year, their leading rusher was Jalen Rouse. He's back. Now, I know that you said they had a really talented running back last year that was really banged up that has since transferred out. Yeah, but he is out. He was banged up a lot last year. You look at their receiver situation, Avery Williams, Karate Brenson, and Deshaun Davis are back. They have a tight end in Trenton Gillison, who started at Michigan State, started his career at Michigan State. Their offensive line is decent sized at spots. They have 3 300-pounders coming back from last year, 275-pound left tackle, 293-pound center. That's the thing, Ryan. I actually think they have okay skill talent. Like it's solid skill talent for that level. Their quarterback, you had said, has had some. I mean, he's a kid that impressed. He was at Austin Peay before he came to Tennessee State and was pretty productive player. Not as productive last year. And I think it really starts, Ryan, when I look at this football team and I break down the film, it's a pretty vanilla team on both sides of the ball. And I think that especially is problematic on offense. You know, the thing that I said to you before the show is like this Tennessee State team from a coaching standpoint reminds me a lot of the Ty Willingham teams. And here's what I mean by that. I'm not comparing Eddie George to Ty Willingham. That would be an insult. What I'm saying is one of the things that I liked about the Notre Dame staff back then is that they were good teaching technique. They were good at teaching the fundamentals of football. And that's partly why Charlie Weiss was able to have success, because they had already been taught how to line up, how to block, how to tackle, how to run routes, how to do all those type of things. And then Charlie came in with the innovative schemes. And so when I look at this team, I say, you know, they're actually relatively well coached. I mean, they know how to line up. They play with sound fundamentals. I don't find a lot of like, wow, this team is just so undisciplined and so poorly coached. I don't see that. What I see, however, is a team that just has no creativity whatsoever. I mean, it's just like they're running some really basic stuff. I would call them a traditional spread offense. They do a lot of 11 personnel. They're traditional, you know, spread offense run game. They'll run some G-wrap. They'll run inside zone. They'll run read zone, power read. It's really basic stuff. Their pass concepts are, you know, solid. There's just nothing exotic about them from what we've seen. Now, I would expect them to try to dial some stuff up against Notre Dame because they know they have to steal some yards.
Sure.
But it's an unimpressive group or system schematically. But I do think they have decent athletes on the perimeter and at running back and a quarterback. There's some decent talent there. The big problem for them is up front. They were a really bad offensive line last season. Finished near the bottom of the nation in sacks allowed. I actually put a breakdown up on it today because what's interesting, Ryan, is if you look at Tennessee State's numbers last year defensively, you look at the national rankings on defense and they're 39th in scoring. They're 29th in tackles for loss, 19th in fewest passing yards allowed, 7th in fewest passing yards allowed per completion, 23rd in third down defense, 2nd in red zone defense. And then we get to the offense. 104th in scoring, averaged 18.3 points per game last year. 98th in yards per game, 106th in yards per play, 78th in rushing yards, 95th in yards per rush. But here's the key. They were 121st in tackles for loss allowed. They played 11 games last year. They gave up 96 tackles for loss. Now, if you look at their running back production, for example, Jalen Rouse averaged 4.8 yards per carry last year. He had 613 yards on 129 carries. When you consider how many negative yards he had, when he actually could get room to go, he was pretty good. But just the negative numbers they had last year, Ryan, they were 90th in passing yards, 91st in yards per attempt, 117th in sacks allowed, 99th in third down offense, and 110th in red zone offense. I mean, this is not a very good group. It's really not.
Well, and I had a little bit of an intel piece that I put up yesterday on Monday that I have a source, you know, it kind of knows a lot about the Tennessee State program. And that kind of, I mean, I'm not surprised by those numbers, Brian, because I kind of echoed a lot of the things I had heard, right? Like he kind of talked a little bit about how the offensive line is just not a great group, and especially pass blocking. He said, especially, he's like just not a very good pass blocking group. But there is some talent offensively from the skill positions, to your point. Like Karate Brenson was a guy that he said that they expect to be their dude potentially this year, a wide receiver, to be a guy that can create some plays. They had two good running backs last year, although the running back yards per carry numbers would not necessarily back that up, that like they were great. And then also Draylen Ellis is a guy that I've been told by that source is like, that kid is a headache as far as like extending plays and creating extra yardage and like doing that type of stuff. But again, if you look at his numbers, it's not going to be very impressive. But you have to understand that a offense, no matter what scheme you run, you're still usually built from the inside out, right? And a good offensive line is what makes an offense go typically, no matter what skill talent you have. And unfortunately, this is a team that just does not have much of it. You know, like Tennessee State just does not have a great offensive line up front. A couple kids with size, to your point, but it really limits guys like Draylen Ellis, excuse me, Rouse at running back, Karate Brenson. Like there is some pretty good talent at wide receiver and running back and quarterback. The issue there is that their growth and their production is stunted because they're not very good up front. So like talk about keys to victory. I know we're not doing keys to victory today, but like Notre Dame has to dominate that offensive line, right? Like you have to dominate it because it's not a good unit and you need to win the battles that you should win on a baseline. And the baseline is the offensive line is not very good. And it shouldn't take, like, you don't have to have a good eye to break down film to watch that offense and be like, yeah, they're not very good offensive line wise. Like, yeah, they're not. And there's nothing to hide from that. They're not a good group.
Right. So you got to do, like, to your point, you got to do what you're supposed to do against that type of unit. We talked about this. Navy wasn't very good on defense from a pass game standpoint. They were pretty good at stopping the run. So your job was to go out there and say, hey, look, you're bigger than they are. You're more talented than they are. You should lean on them. You should be better than them. And Notre Dame did. And you get credit for that. And so this is an opportunity for the defensive line to say, hey, look, in some ways, Ryan, it really is kind of in some ways, it's a good opponent for Notre Dame to have in week 2. And in other ways, it's like, maybe not. The good way is because nobody is making a bigger technical change from week 1, game 1 to game 2 than the defensive line. Sure. Nobody. The linebackers have differences, but it's more eye discipline. They're different calls. The defensive line attacks the game completely differently when you're playing an option team than when you're playing a team like this. And so this is a great time to kind of get back to playing with a more sound fundamentals. But the other part is, if you dominate, you're kind of beating up on a inferior opponent. So you're not being challenged from a man-to-man standpoint as players. And that's the negative, the drawback to it, because as you said, now the skill players to a degree will face a good test that they're going to play. Honestly, some of these receivers are better than the kids Navy had last week at receiver, to be honest with you. And the quarterback can obviously throw better than what they had at Navy last week. So that part should be a decent test. But can they protect the quarterback? That's what we're gonna find out. And this should be a game where the defensive line eats, Ryan. It's just as simple as that. It really should. And that's something I'm curious about. I'm not sure where you come down on this. I'm very curious to see if Al Golden's going to really light Tennessee up, or does he let his defensive line kind of see what they can do a little bit? I'm very curious to see what we're going to see from, because they could heat Tennessee State up early and just completely dominate them.
I know. I want to see them just be super aggressive with their defensive line and be like, "Hey, Riley, like, shoot that gap and go make a play, sir. Like, show me what you could do." Yeah. Right. I don't want any. Like, this isn't a. It's funny because I still want to see creativity with offense, because I think that needs to translate week to week. But I don't want to see defense be that creative this week. I want to see guys just go, man. Like, just go and make plays and be yourself. Because I just don't think defensively you have to be creative to shut down this offense. I really don't. I want to see guys be guys, because I still want to know exactly what Riley Mills is for this team. I still want to know if I can trust Maris Loythal on a week-to-week basis to make plays, to be in the right spots. I want to know if any of these safeties can be the guys that Notre Dame is going to need them to be long-term. Like, let Xavier Watts loose and see if he can make some plays this week. Like, I want to see if these guys just let loose can go make plays. Like, if they have to scheme stuff up for like second-level pressures against Tennessee State, then you're probably in a little bit of trouble there, right? Your defensive line is probably not getting home. Your defensive line should be able to get home against a team like this.
Yeah. Yeah, we're on the same page then, Ryan. You and I are certainly on the same page when it comes to what we want to see from the offense. Now, let's talk a little bit about their defense, Ryan, because this is the side of the ball that you and I are more impressed with. And I know you spent a lot of time breaking their defense down. You also, if you're not a member of the board, Ryan had a great intel piece. So he has some connections to the Tennessee State program. So he was able to get a lot of intel about the Tennessee State program, what's good, what's not good. I know that you were super high on Clark Phillips when he was at Utah. His younger brother plays at Tennessee State.
Good player.
They have some talent, Ryan. So just number one, just kind of share a little bit about what you've seen from Tennessee State defensively. Sure. I know you've said they're a pretty vanilla 4-2-5 team, but they were still pretty good last year with that, that vanilla 4-2-5, Ryan, because I think you nailed it as far as what they are. But again, 39th in the country in scoring. Part of that was on their offense, because their offense was so bad. Sure. They ranked 39th in the nation in yards allowed per rush. They ranked 29th nationally last year in tackles for loss. That's an impressive number for a team that doesn't trigger a lot. And a lot of that was their defensive linemen making plays, to be honest with you. The kid that they have coming back, Terrell Allen, he was a double-digit tackle for loss guy last year. Really disruptive player. I love the comment you said to me before the show, Ryan. You said he's their Howard Cross.
Yes.
And I think you completely nailed that. That was perfect. Pass game wise, they were 19th in passing yards allowed, 18th in yards per attempt allowed, 7th in yards per completion allowed, 35th in sacks, 23rd in third down defense, and 2nd in red zone defense. And so again, defensively, when you consider how bad their offense was, those are actually really good numbers.
Yeah.
For a team that was that bad on offense. And so I know you really like the personnel, Ryan, so why don't you just kind of share with people what you've kind of seen on film, and then also a little bit about what you've heard about the team from some of your sources.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, 4-2-5 base, so they're playing something very similar to what you're going to see from Notre Dame on a week-to-week basis. It's very, very vanilla in the sense that they are not scheming up a ton of pressures from the second level. They are just kind of letting their guys be guys. And I'll talk about one up front that especially is their dude coming back, a guy that can create a little bit of havoc in the backfield. But defensively, from the front seven perspective, like they are just doing their job, right? Like find ball, get to ball. Like it's just very basic stuff. It's nothing like I mean, there was one game in particular I watched. I believe it was the last game of the year against Texas Commerce. Like they just were just saying, guys, just go to flow to the ball. Like there was barely any second level pressure at all. So like they're not a heavy blitz team. Secondary wise, I think they're very confident what they have in the secondary, which I'll get into. So they don't do a ton in the secondary either. I mean, they're either going to line up with a single high or two high look at the safety position. They run a whole lot of cover one because they have a lot of confidence in their corners. They'll also run some two-man, so two safeties high, but still man across the board underneath. And then they'll also run some quarters coverage at times too. So they're running cover 4 across the board, 4 deep. That's really all they do. And I think that the reason that they do this and they keep it pretty vanilla is because I think they like a lot of their personnel, especially in the secondary. Like they allow guys to flow up front because they have trust in their secondary. They do. Bryce Phillips, who is the younger brother of Clark Phillips, to your point, 6'1", 195-pound corner, wears number 0. He, I believe, is their most talented player on defense. He was a kid that actually came in the 2020 year when JUCO first. He was a kid that was his production or his opportunities were killed coming out as a 2021 kid because he's a California kid, and his season was completely killed because of COVID, his senior season. So he didn't have a senior year. So he had to go JUCO, ends up at Tennessee State. He led the team in pass breakups last year. He had 10 passes defense, playing defensive, playing corner. And I really think that he is a very interesting and talented corner. He's long, he's springy. He's a good corner. Now, Notre Dame's going to have to account for that young man. Like this kid could play corner at a much higher level than Tennessee State, in my opinion. I wouldn't be shocked if after the season he transfers up to a Tennessee, for instance. Like I wouldn't be shocked at that at all. Like this is a good football player. But then they also have, I think is their most consistent player on defense is Josh Green, who's their safety. He's number 6. He's a good player. I mean, I was told by my source, dependable, like 6 different times with Josh Green. Like he's just a guy that you know is going to be in the right spot and he's going to make plays. Like he's just Mr. Dependable on their defense. But I mean, in the front 7, Brian, like to your point, like Terrell Allen, you already named before, he is this team's version of Howard Cross. He's 6 foot, 275 pounds listed, which means he's probably 5'11", 270 pounds, if we're being completely honest with ourselves. But he had 12 tackles for loss last year, 4.5 sacks. He's a disruptive kid. Like they're just trying to one gap him, telling him to attack the football, working gaps. Like that's just really what he is. He's not going to be a 2-gap style player. He is a gap shooter, create havoc in the backfield. And then they also have a linebacker that I was told isn't going to be on anybody's stat sheet for Tennessee State last year, but Monroe Beard III, who apparently was at one of the other HBCUs. I think he was at Arkansas Pine Bluff. He was at Arkansas Pine Bluff originally. Yep. And I'm told that kid is another spark plug. 5'11", 220 listed, probably a little bit smaller, but that's their guy that's trying to create chaos on the second level. He's everywhere from what I heard from my source. So secondary, I think it's a good secondary. Notre Dame is going to have to play good football at wide receiver to beat a couple of these guys. I think that they're good football players. And up front, they're undersized, undermanned, but they're athletic and they're very aggressive football players. Like Monroe Beard is going to go and try to make some tackles for loss in this game. Terrell Allen is going to be a guy they're going to move over the line of scrimmage a ton and try to make some plays. But I really think it all starts in their secondary, which they have some, I think it's a couple of legitimate FBS football players that could play higher level on the secondary. And they build everything off of that. They are comfortable with their coverage shells. They're comfortable in coverage in general. And they let guys like Terrell Allen and newcomer Monroe Beard create some havoc in the front sevens. But basic stuff, man. 4-2-5, coverages, cover 1, 2-man, cover 4. Nothing exotic on this defense. They just have a couple good football players that Notre Dame is going to have to account for.
I like both of their edge players, Ryan. I do. I think the Chris Walker kid, he was young last year. He had a pretty good season as part of their front rotation. If you look at the returning stats last year, Ryan, he had 5 tackles for loss. He had 2 sacks as a part of their rotation. Pretty good athlete, long kid, skinny, but long, pretty quality athletic kid. I'm not saying they're going to give Notre Dame a test, but what I'm saying is like those 2 guys are going to be a key. If Tennessee State's going to get turned around, those 2 guys are going to be a key, because here's my thing. If they can figure out a way this season, and I'm not talking about Notre Dame. I'm talking about looking beyond for them, Notre Dame. If Allen and Walker can be as disruptive as Allen was last year, and then what I think Walker can now do now that he goes into, from sophomore to junior, that allows their secondary really to be even more productive than it was a year ago. They got Darius Harper at the other cornerback position. He's a pretty good player too. He had a pick 6. You talk about the Commerce game. He had a pick 6 in that game to start things off.
Number 30. I think it was the first play of the game.
Yeah. So he's a good football player. And to your point, they do like to be somewhat aggressive with their corners and coverage. They let them come up and play tight. It reminds me a lot of Marshall last year, where you looked at it and you're like, in the trenches, Notre Dame should dominate this game. But I'll tell you what, they got some pretty good corners. Younger brother of a guy that was more well-known, kind of a similar thing. Josh Green is a really good football player. He's their leading returning tackler from last year, had 56 tackles, 3 picks, 3 breakups. And they've got some good production in the backup. They've had a lot of guys that have played in the secondary, not even just the starters. The other corner, the backup corner to Darius Harper, that kid's huge. Jashawn Watkins, he's 5'6", or 6'4", 5'6", 6'4", 215 pounds. He transferred from Memphis.
Yeah.
And so he's not even a starter for them. So another kid that they had, Fondren Hollis, who's the backup to Clark Phillips last year, he had 6 pass breakups last season. So they have a very experienced secondary. They can match up with teams that go 11 personnel and put some athletes on the field. So I like what I saw from their secondary, Ryan. And if their edge guys can get any kind of consistent pressure, I think they've got a chance to be a very disruptive defense this season and force a lot of turnovers. And honestly, if they're going to win games, they're going to need it. They're going to need short fields. They're going to need to be able to do those things, because they're just, unless we just see a big jump from their offense, Ryan, they have a long way to go from where they were last year to being a competent offense that can help them win 7, 8, 9 games. I mean, that's just going to be
a lot of turnover on that team, to your point, over the last couple of years. I mean, there's basically every starter, not every starter, that's a little hyperbolic, but like a lot of their starters are transfer players that have transferred from either junior college or from another school, like a lot of them. I even mentioned Bryce Phillips. Like Bryce Phillips was a junior college kid originally before he came to Tennessee State. Like there's the linebacker that I think the Monroe kid, who's going to be probably their best player, he was a transfer from Arkansas Pine Bluff. So I mean, there's a lot of transfers on this team, a lot of them.
I actually like how Tennessee State did their 2 deep. They actually show where kids are from and then where they previously were, which I like. Their offense has 6 transfers in their starting lineup on offense. And their defense has, 3, 4, 5, 6 as well. And they're starting defensive side of the ball. And then there's some backups. They have a backup nose tackle from McNeese State. They have a backup D tackle from Butte College. They have a backup D tackle from corner from Memphis. They have a backup safety from Missouri. So, I mean, they've got several guys who are, they're starting kickers from Northern Illinois. They're starting punters from Western Michigan, right? They're holders from Western Michigan because it's their punter. Like to your point, Ryan, they have a lot of transfers.
Yep.
But there's also a lot of those guys that are back for year 2. And I'm curious to see how that's if that at all has an impact now that they get some of these guys together for a second year.
It's so tough on the FCS level too, Brian, because like if you find a stud, because usually from the high school recruiting side, you're taking a gamble on a guy with traits and you're trying to build them up, right? So like
Mhm.
the Trey Lances of the world, right? Where you're like, oh, that kid's not great right now, but like he can be if we get him to be that type of player or develop him properly. But then the problem with the transfer portal era is that an FCS team is going to build up a football player, and then a bigger school is going to come in and be like, hey, come on down. Like
Right.
I told
Right.
you about the South Dakota State tight end last year that was drafted in the third round in this past draft, Tucker Kraft, who Alabama was tampering with to try to get him to transfer from South Dakota
Right.
State. Like if these schools create these players and find a stud and a guy
Yep.
that's diamond in the rough, they're going to get pillaged for their talented players. Like it's just going to
Right.
happen, unfortunately, with the transfer portal era.
Well, the transfer portal and the NIL, they can just pay kids to come. I
Exactly.
mean, and that's why I love the kid from South Dakota State stayed. He said no.
Yes.
He stayed.
Yeah, he got
Right.
offered six figures, and he's like,
Yeah.
"You guys didn't give me the time of the day when I was coming to high school,
Right.
so why am I giving you the time of the day now?" And I'm
Right.
like, "That's awesome, man. Good for you."
The sad thing is though, he's rare.
Yeah, oh
Like
yeah, very rare.
he's
Yeah.
rare. Most kids aren't going to do that. And I
Yep.
understand it. It's just the world we live in. So that's Tennessee State. We're not going to spend a ton of time. I'm very curious to see what this football team's going to be able to do this season, Ryan. Just forget the Notre Dame aspect of it. This is not going to be a competitive game. I would like to see Coach Eddie George do well. I'm a believer, like, just because you're a good player doesn't mean you're a good coach. I
No.
mean, that's just the reality of it.
Yep.
But when a player that I liked becomes a coach, I want to see him do well. And I think this could be an opportunity for Eddie George to obviously grow as a coach. And we'll see what they do. They have Arkansas Pine Bluff the week after the Notre Dame game. Then they play Gardner Webb. Then they play UT Martin. They play Kennesaw State at Kennesaw
Yep.
State. They play Norfolk State. They play Lincoln. They play Lindenwood. They play at Charleston Southern, at Eastern Illinois, and then home against Tennessee Tech. So it's actually a somewhat manageable schedule for them if they can
Okay.
be better than
Yeah.
they were last season.
Notre Dame's a good warm up for Arkansas Pine Bluff, man. It'll get the juices
Yeah.
flowing a little bit. For
Yeah, Arkansas Pine Bluff's kids are going to look super small and slow next week after starting up against Notre Dame. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. So, so Ryan, obviously, we wrap up the Tennessee kind of overview, Tennessee State overview with just look. This is more about Notre Dame than it is the opponent.
Yeah.
We're going to learn a lot more about Notre Dame's leadership and focus and drive this weekend than and it has nothing to do with Tennessee State. It has nothing to do with the score. Again, they could win 63-7, Ryan, and we're just like, they just kind of went through the motions.
Really could.
They could win 56-3, and you're like, wow, this team showed me something. I mean, that same score that you could use the same score could tell us, two different stories because there's just a huge talent difference in this game.
I think it's usually about like what translates to like the bigger games, right? Like all due respect, but I'm trying to be nice here. I don't want to throw some shade, but like one of the corners, right? Like not Bryce Phillips, because I think he's really talented, but like maybe a backup corner, right? If you're going against Tobias Merriweather and it's just like a vertical ball where Tobias doesn't stack him, for instance, and he just is able to go up and moss the kid and win above the rim. Like, is that incredibly translatable to beating Clemson, right?
Yeah.
Like, is that translatable? Probably not. But if he's still able to show his technique to stack the guy properly and find a blind spot and to, late hands to the catch point and like that type of stuff, just staying true to the technique to understand what's translatable against NC State the week after and not just a guy being better than a guy, if that makes sense.
What is interesting about offense, though, Ryan, is I do think this can be a confidence-building game for some guys that are either learning new positions or are younger. Like obviously Jaden Greathouse got his confidence built last week. What about Tobias? What about Rico Flores? What about Holden Stace? Yeah, of course, you expect them to dominate the guys they're going against, but it doesn't mean that there isn't some positive vibes that they can get by building against these kind of teams, especially on the skill positions, because as you mentioned, this is a pretty quality secondary. For Tennessee State, if you're Eddie George, what are you looking for? This is what you're looking for. I want you guys to compete your butts off for 60 minutes. I don't care what the score says. I don't care how many times they've scored or how many times we haven't scored. I'm going to learn a lot about you guys by how you compete for 60 minutes. That's what I'm going to learn about, because no matter what the outcome of this game, if you guys give me everything you have, if you battle your tails off for 60 minutes, if you have the right attitude, if you play as a team, then no win, lose, or draw against Notre Dame, we're going to be better for it. That's the message. And so I do think that we're going to see Tennessee State can play hard against Notre Dame. I would hope that's what we see. And that'll tell us if they're going to be a team that can go out there and maybe get something rolling a little bit moving forward. The other thing too is that because there are a lot of transfers, I mean, there's a lot of kids. This is the game you want to be able to send. If you are someone who's looking to transfer, you're going to want to be able to send this game to people. Hey, look what I did against Notre Dame, right? Sure. I mean, so let's be honest. There's some kids that are going to have that mindset, Ryan, and they're going to go out there and try to do something.
It happened last year for Austin P. There was a wide receiver who had like 7 catches for 100 yards against Alabama, and now he's at Texas Tech, right? Like that happens every single year. So it's a resume game.
The two kids from Kent State against Washington, was it last year?
Yep.
Right? Went out and both had really good games, and now all of a sudden
some Walker.
Yeah, what one's at Penn State, right?
Those in North Carolina. Yep.
Right, there you go. So there's going to be those opportunities for these guys, obviously, this year. So that's going to kind of do it for this part of the breakdown. We're going to have a mailbag next, but we did want to dive a little bit into Tennessee State. Hit that like button, everybody. Hit that subscribe button. Share this podcast. We would love it if you would give us a 5-star review if you're listening via podcast platform. Sign up for the message boards at boards.rushbreakdown.com. We had a lot of signups this past week. We also, Ryan, some exciting news about the podcast platform. We have set a new record for the month of August, actually forever, but the month of August, we set a record. Our previous high was about 466 downloads in a month. We are already over 500,000 for the month, and there's still 2 more whole days left, including part of today. So thank you all very, very much for the growth that we've had. It's very, very much appreciated, and we got a lot more planned, and we have a lot more planned, no doubt about that. But we definitely wanted to thank you all for your support of Irish Breakdown, not just this month, but just over the last few years. Just looking at the growth we've had, we had more downloads last week for Navy than we had our first month when we started the podcast in 2021. So certainly excited about that. It's mailbag time. So let's dive into the mailbag, Ryan. We do have some super chats. We don't have a lot of mailbag questions. So if you do have some questions, go ahead and get those in there now, and we will bring those up. We're having some issues with the chat today. It's a StreamYard issue.
Oh.
So, Ryan, I'm going to have to occasionally, I don't know if you can open your chat back up and see if the last one for you is at 2:00. Because the last one for me is at 2:00. I know there's more coming because I can see them on the actual live feed.
Is at 1:54.
Yeah, so that's going to be a bit of an issue. So we are going to try to get that fixed. But good old StreamYard coming through for us once again. So we'll try to get to some of these questions, but some of these are just not going to show up. Let's get things started here, Ryan, with a super chat from Raymond Hartman.
Raymond's question said, well, just might be a comment. Thank you so much, Raymond, for the super chat. Just showing support. I don't normally ask this kind of thing, but I would like to ask for prayers for my family and those in my area. We are in the direct path of the hurricane. Thank you, and go Irish.
Yeah, I know you aren't alone, Raymond. And was it Idalia? That's the name of it, right? Idalia.
I believe so. Yeah.
Definitely stay safe. Listen to your local authorities and what they're telling you to do. Obviously, this is not their first rodeo. So just be safe, man. And we'll be praying for all you guys down there, guys and gals down there. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Scary, man. Very scary stuff. Tom Connor with the super chat. Tom, thank you so much. Said, love IB and especially Vince.
Absolutely.
Oh. What about Ryan and Brian?
Yeah, Vince needs it more right now than we do.
That's very true. Alan Watson with the super chat. Thank you so much, Alan. I know it's only been 1 week, but this is the offense I thought we were getting when Brian Kelly first arrived. What, if anything, new would you like to see?
I don't know if I would like to see anything new. Look, I'll say this. I know that there's stuff in their run game repertoire that they didn't get to against Navy, that they honestly didn't need to. And you guys will, I think, see more of that on display this week. And just the nature of how Navy plays with their heavy edge pressures, Ryan, a lot of Notre Dame's runs were designed to get inside of it. The inside zone is a quick hitter inside of it. The duo is a quick hitter inside of it. And even the counter play, the way that they were blocking it with the kick out and the double wrap, they were trying to split inside of it. They were trying to basically kick out the edge pressure and be able to crease inside of it. First two they did. The last one they didn't. They went -1. I thought the second and third time they ran it, the backs, and one of our people on the message board mentioned this too, but I thought it was a very astute observation. The backs got a little bit impatient on that run. Like Audric Estime got downhill before like Rocco Spindler did. And that wasn't on Rocco. That was on Audric for not letting the time up, because he ended up having a big play because the nature of the play, they still were able to get inside of the edge pressure. But there's some other stuff that we've seen. I can't get into specifics, but I think you guys will see it this week, most likely, that because it is a more traditional offense, Ryan, we'll see some different concepts.
Yep.
Offensively, what else do I want to see? I want to see a few more shots outside. I know they like to do it. Navy was leaving the middle of the field open against them this past week, and they took it. So I'm not a believer in forcing things, but I think this week, Ryan, against Tennessee State and how they cover, when you see the too high stuff, if they stay too high, if they're two-man, you're going to want to continue doing what you've done, which is attack the middle of the field with the inside seams and posts and some of the high-low stuff. But you will get some single high against Tennessee State, and when you do, especially on first and second down, I do want to see some outside shots. And if you can win those outside shots this week, I understood your example, Ryan. I just think that if you are able to win convincingly, and I think your point wasn't that it's not that you're not beating them that's impressive. It's like if you just do it sloppily and just out-town them, you didn't really learn anything. That's how you're beating them. Right. That's how you're beating them. I think if you beat them the right way, these are good corners, right? I mean, they're good players, and so that'll tell us a little something. So I just want to see some wins outside this week down the field. And that's not new. That's just that they didn't need that last week. And I don't think they should have forced it just to get reps at it. This week, those opportunities will be there for the offense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Middleton, Bryce Phillips is a much more comparable player to Shaheem Battle and Aiden White off of NC State than like what Navy had last week, right? Like they just didn't have those type of athletes outside. So yeah, I mean, I think there's matchups that I definitely want to see. More than anything though, Alan, like I saw just about everything in the toolbox that I wanted to see last week as far as running game being diverse and passing game implementing some new concepts or more consistent concepts, I should say, and also getting more players involved, which I thought was great. I just want to see consistency, right? Like let's stack good weeks on good weeks on good weeks, and then Notre Dame's going to be a pretty dang good offense by the end of the stretch of the season, because you're going to have a bunch of different players that are feeling confidence going in the final stretch of the season. So I just want to see consistency offensively, man. Like run game diversity, I had a big check in week 1. Quarterback play, I had a big check. Offensive playmakers, I had a check just in general. Offensive line, check. Now let's build on that and let's continue the consistency if you can. I think Notre Dame has a chance to be a really good offense in this season in general.
All right. We have another super chat down here, Ryan. Thank you, Alan, again for yours. And here's Tyler's. Tyler just says, look, I see trust in the team this year. I agree with you, Tyler. The question that Ryan and I got to earlier is it's got to be a consistent thing. Right? That's what we want to see, is we want to see that consistency from week to week. And Tyler, thank you very much for your super chat.
Agree. Chief Brody with the super chat as well. Thank you, Chief. If this were a Brian Kelly team, do you think I'm right by saying the season would likely look like lose close to Ohio State, beat USC, and then blown out by Clemson 10-2?
No, I don't think that. I think the 10-2 would be accurate, Ryan, but I don't think that. I don't think that we would see them get blown out. Look, I know that the Miami game was a blowout. But if you look at Brian Kelly's tenure at Notre Dame, that blowout was in a bit of an anomaly for Brian Kelly's later teams, because, I mean, usually in the regular season, they would – and Ryan, before you do what I just text you to do, I do want to get your answer to this particular question. Brian Kelly's teams would lose in the regular season, but they didn't often get blown out. I know the Miami game is the one that sticks in all of our crawls, but that wasn't the norm. They might lose by 10. They might, but you go back to like the Stanford game in 2010, But like in the big games, they would lose them all, but they didn't often get blown out. Like Michigan was a bit of an anomaly, but it was more like the Georgia games, the Oklahoma game in 2013 where they lost by 14, but they had the ball with a chance to tie it in the fourth quarter. I mean, it was usually games like that. There was the occasional blowout, but and then when you look at Clemson, look, all I can do is go off history, and Brian Kelly's only trip to Clemson was a 2-point loss. So, I think the record would be the same? Yeah. Honestly, Ryan, if they were going to get blown out by anybody, it'd be Ohio State, just because that's the kind of team Brian Kelly just didn't get up for. His teams didn't get up for. They beat USC. They might even beat Clemson, although, because look, they won at Oklahoma in 2012. So the other reason I don't necessarily agree with this premise is this is a really talented team, like a really talented team. What I would say is if Brian Kelly was coaching this same team, it would have a very high floor because you're going to beat 10 teams. You're not going to go 0-3 against the best teams in your schedule. You're going to minimum be a 10-win team. We would just know the floor's not aside. And the other part, Ryan, is if Brian Kelly's still the head coach, some of the young talent on the roster that we're excited about isn't on the roster.
Sure.
Jeremiah Love's not at Notre Dame. He's not. Jaden Osbury's not at Notre Dame. Jaden Greathouse isn't at Notre Dame, right? Rico Flores isn't at Notre Dame. Braylon James isn't at Notre Dame. There's a lot of those guys that aren't at Notre Dame because Marcus Freeman would have probably left after 2021, if we're being honest about it. So no, that would be the bigger issue, not so much the other part. That's my 2 cents on that one.
Well, I think that the results, Chief, I agree with Brian. I think it might have just looked a little bit different than how you laid out, but I think that your overall encompassing though is 10-2 sounds about right to me. I mean, it does. I mean, I think that yes, the results compared to postseason versus regular season games against some of these bigger opponents was a little bit different under BK, but at the end of it, would I have felt confident that Notre Dame could win 2 out of 3 against USC, Ohio State, and Clemson with Brian Kelly? The answer is no. I wouldn't have felt confident. I feel more confident that Notre Dame's going to come to play against those teams with the current the current coaching staff that they have now. Now they have to go out and prove me right, that profit a little bit there, but I really think that this is just a little bit of a different scenario than a typical Brian Kelly year. So,
yeah. All right, next question is from Irish Gordian Knot. I know a lot of people are going to be upset that we are playing an FCS team, and I was angry when I first heard about it, but now I'm over it. I don't see the point in getting upset about inevitability. I'm with you. Look, I expressed my opinion on it when it first happened. I don't like it. I don't agree with it. It's not what I would have done. I kind of like the fact that Notre Dame never played an FCS opponent. I think that's a smart thing. I don't think there's a natural FCS opponent for Notre Dame to play. That would make sense unless you're going to play like Dayton or Georgetown, because Dayton's I think a Catholic school or Jesuit school or something like that. I think I could be wrong on that, but I don't know. I expressed my opinion, and now there's nothing I can do about it. So no, I'm not going to spend all week hammering that this shouldn't be happening. It is. And so we're going to focus on the analysis. My opinion hasn't changed. If you were to say, would you rather be playing Tennessee State this weekend, or would you rather be playing Ball State? I'd say I'd rather be playing Ball State, a team like that. I'd rather be playing like Northwestern or somebody like that in week 2, an inferior opponent that you can kind of get right and get healthy against, but not necessarily this kind of inferior opponent. So no, I'm not happy about it. But again, to your point, Irish Gordy, I think you nailed it, that I don't see the point in getting upset about it. I don't. So it is what it is. It is what it is. Ryan, you have some thoughts on this? I know you saw the question.
I actually wasn't paying attention.
It's just about, the people still being upset that they're playing an FCS opponent, and being angry about it when it first happened. But now it's just like, look, we've had a lot of time to get ready for it. It's move on. I don't like it. I don't agree with it, but it's here. Let's talk about the game, and let's talk about this Notre Dame football.
Yeah. I mean, it's old issue at this point. This is the reality we're living in. So would I have liked it to be a better FCS school? I think that that's a conversation that we could have had. Irish Gordy, not for me, right? Is that I want to play a team that I think, for me, like I look at it and say that that's more of a test for Notre Dame, because at the end of the day, man, like you're going to be judged by what your end result is, what the end record is, but is anybody really going to get juiced up for the fact that Notre Dame's playing against Tennessee State from a national perspective, or from just general fan perspective? Like the diehards are always going to watch and always going to love it, right?
Right.
But like, does Tennessee State elicit some like feelings of like, yeah, let's go, let's beat this team? Like it just doesn't, right? So I think the different FCS team might have been a different conversation for me. But at the end of the day, this is the schedule that it is. It's a very hard schedule outside of this FCS opponent.
Right.
Let's win and then move on to a much tougher test next week against
Right.
NC State.
Right. I got some more super chats down here. Tyler Evans.
Tyler says Michigan's offensive coordinator suspended. What is going on at Michigan? And I saw Kyle McCord named Ohio State's quarterback 1.
Well, they did say we're going to Ohio State. They also said Devin Brown would play. What I'm curious about, Ryan, is this Ohio State doing with their quarterbacks what Michigan did last year?
They're going to rotate them.
Does Kyle McCord start the opener, and then do they give Devin Brown game 2? Is he just going to kind of come in and play, see how he does, and then make that decision? I don't know. But I'm not shocked that Kyle McCord is starting the first game. I'm not. And honestly, if it's close, they should go with Kyle McCord. Here's the deal. If you go with the younger guy and he falters and you put Kyle McCord back in, the odds are you're losing Devin Brown. Not so much transfer-wise, but just mentally. You can really shake a kid like that when you have to bench him in that regard. Maybe he plays well and it's great, but if he plays well and he's great, well, then you potentially lose Kyle McCord. You play the veteran if it's close, and then if the veteran isn't giving you what you need, then you turn to the young guy. And then there's less pressure now on the young guy who's never played. That's kind of how I've always looked at it. If it's close, if Devin Brown, for example, was definitely better than Kyle McCord, then you play the better guy. I mean, you just do. But if it's close, I always kind of err on the guy that's done it before. And it's not like Devin or Kyle McCord's some bum with no ability. I mean, he was a top 100 recruit coming out of high school as well, and he's got some skill. I think Devin Brown's got more athleticism, certainly, but Kyle McCord's going to run that offense just fine, in my opinion.
I wonder, did good old Ryan Day announce who's calling the offense for the first game?
I know,
or is
right?
that still up in
Seriously.
the air? Like, something we're not talking about for some reason.
I know that's something that's really bothered you, and I completely get it. It's just
it's just like, I don't know. Like, a quarterback battle is one thing, but like, are we having an offensive coordinator battle right now? Like, I don't understand this conversation.
Right.
Like, also, like, I'm not a big fan of like too many voices in a room. Like, if I'm a quarterback, if I'm Kyle McCord or Devin Brown, I'm looking at Brian Hartline in one direction. I'm looking at Ryan Day in the other. And like, am I certain who's going to be calling the offensive plays to start the day? Like, I don't know. It's just, that's a really weird dynamic to me. Really strange.
Yeah.
Michigan offense coordinator suspended. I mean,
does that have to do with the same thing that happened with Harbaugh? Is it all part of the same thing? It was for recruiting violations, which I think is comical. That Michigan is the team the NCAA is kind of going after for recruiting violations. So let's just ignore everything happening in the SEC and in the Big 12 and all this, and with USC. And I mean, Jordan Addison's out there, in LA looking for places to say before he even jumps in the portal. Let's ignore that, but let's hammer Michigan for, buying cheeseburgers and then not being forthcoming about it. Like, it's so stupid. It's just so dumb. And look, I would gladly take any shot I could at going after Michigan. Look, Harbaugh was silly to not be honest about it, right? I mean, that was dumb. And he continues to be just the king of just these type of just dumb comments, and his most recent comments are just dumb. But it's just kind of like, but we're really, this is what we're upset about. This is what we're going to hammer people for, is this, right? Like, come on, guys. It's ridiculous.
What do you expect when you eat so many boogers, Like, you just say stupid things all the time.
There you go. There you go again. Jim Halloran didn't want to leave you out, Ryan, so Jim got one for you. Thank you, Jim. Thank you very, very much.
Alan Watson with the super chat, who says, I was impressed by the play calling from the first-time coordinator and play caller. I am closer to Forrest Gump than I am to Lou Holtz, but even I knew what we were going to run last year. Yeah,
I mean, I get that. Clemson knew too, and it didn't matter. It really didn't matter. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes.
We had a question from David Lowe. What's up, David? How can 247 claim Notre Dame is one of the 10 biggest brands in college football? Our fan base reaches other country. Wait, is not. And oh, wow. How can 247 claim Notre Dame is not one of the 10 biggest brands in college football? Our fan base reaches other countries. No way Oklahoma and Oregon have bigger brands.
I don't know that they said that. I didn't hear it. I didn't read it.
That's one of the most ignorant things.
It wouldn't shock me. But David, here's the thing, man. This is the same outlet who will make a ranking that you'll allow to impact your view of a recruit. I just want to throw that out there. If they rank a kid as a 3-star and he commits to Notre Dame, you will have questions about how good that kid is. And yet they consistently write crap like this. If this in fact happened, I don't know that it did. I didn't read it. But if this is true, a true representation of what they wrote, this is par for the course for 247. Why are you surprised? It's clickbait material. But it should also make you think twice about the value you put in their recruiting rankings. I'm just going to say that. You can't have both. You can't say this is a dumb article. They don't know what they're talking about. But yeah, they're really good at ranking players. You know what I mean? Like, it's the same people, basically. It's the same company with the same standard. So I just would encourage you to maybe think about that when you start flipping out about where Notre Dame, because, yesterday David's complaining about the Notre Dame stat. I'm in the chat. Ryan's doing the show and I'm in there trying to start some things. And David's complaining about, the defensive class. Well, the only reason he's complaining about the defensive class is where people like this have them ranked.
Yeah. David, did we talk about how Bodie Cahoon had 17 total tackles this past week, man? Can we talk about that? Yeah. I mean, I'll even say this, Brian. I don't know if you've seen much of him, but like the first 2 games, Tabron Benny Powell looks a lot better than I anticipated so far. I mean, he looks pretty good to me.
Logan Thomas has been really athletic. Bryce Young looks phenomenal. Leonard Moore's a dude. Kingston. He's looked great the first 2 games.
Yeah.
But no, I'm not trying to come down on you too hard, David, but I'm just saying, but this is par for the course for them. If this is in fact what they said, it's par for the course, man. Like, this is what they do. What I don't understand is why we as fans get worked up about stuff that we just know who they are. It's one thing to talk about it, but how can they do that? Because here's why they do that. Because they know people like you, and I mean this with all due respect, will get upset about it and we'll share it with other Notre Dame fans and other teams that were left out, and then they'll keep clicking on it to look at it so they can get enraged by it. It's a grift. Dude, that's all politics. That's all that political coverage is now. It's what sports coverage is now. Like, I'm watching Richard Sherman and Michael Irvin, just screaming at each other, talking about how to properly catch. I'm like, this isn't grown up stuff. This is what sells now, apparently. And that's what 247 does, because they know the rage machine will get going, and it doesn't really matter about the legitimacy of the analysis. These sites just like to put silly things out there. They'll lie about people, right? We've seen that, right? We are experiencing that right now. They'll just lie about something, but it gets them clicks, and that's all that they care about. They don't care about integrity and doing a good job and honest analysis. They care about X number of people are going to click on this, and we're going to make money. And I don't want to grow that way. Like people say, oh, you should be happy about what's going on with you guys right now. Why? I don't want to grow that way. It's like, it's silly. But that's who 247 is, guys. So I don't understand why you put value on what they say about this, what they say about recruits, or anything else. You shouldn't. I don't.
I just wouldn't value that particular headline if that's exactly what they said, David, because like even Ohio State fans or USC fans or whoever else was on that list that hate Notre Dame, they know that that's not true either. Right. Like, even they would be like, yeah, Notre Dame's a big brand.
Right.
Like, we gotta beat them on the field, but like,
we got an LSU fan, Ryan, right here, insured by Big, LSU fan in the chat. So glad I bet my futures on Notre Dame. The national media is finally seeing the potential, plus Notre Dame will crush USC this year, right? But here's the deal. It's going to get clicks. People are going to click on it, and it's going to create conversation and narratives, and that's what they're looking for.
Yeah, because either people are going to click that hate Notre Dame, or the Notre Dame fans that love Notre Dame are going to click it because they're going to be like, that's stupid, that's idiotic. And it's going to drive emotions on both sides.
It's a grift. That's all it is.
Yeah.
I'm going to read this one, Ryan, because I want to get your opinion. Domer Grizz says, what was the least surprising aspect of the Navy game for you? For me, it was Hartman. He was what we brought him here to be. Happy to see it.
I think Sam Hartman was probably a top 2, one for me, Domer Grizz. I mean, him and Joe Alt were the two that I was just like, yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, I literally wrote in a recap, or actually not even a recap. I doing a little bit of kind of a matchup article for Tennessee State this week, and I kind of recapped what the offensive line looked like last year, and it was like pretty simple. Of like Joe Alt was Joe Alt, like the proven commodities were still the proven commodities. Joe Alt was I think going into this past game, Joe Alt was the one guy just from an individual perspective. I was like, I expect Joe Alt to be a guy, obviously, right? But Sam Hartman was probably a close one. Like what Sam Hartman showed me game 1 is exactly what I expected him to be against Navy.
Yeah,
exactly what I expect him to be. Create some big plays, be more consistent with the football, and make good decisions. And that's what Sam Hartman did. So he was a close second probably to Joe Alt. But Joe Alt was like he's the most known commodity on this roster for me. Like I just expect Joe Alt to be good every single week.
right.
And most weeks. I mean, that's just kind of where we are.
I agree. Got another super chat down here from Todd Barami.
Todd Brammy says, going to my first Notre Dame game September 23rd for my 21st birthday.
That's awesome.
And went to my first NFL game for my 16th birthday with my dad for both. What are y'all favorite sports memories with your parents or dad in general?
Ryan, growing up, we would go to a lot of Cincinnati Reds games, and I remember those. And a lot of times we'd get to take a friend, so we'd go down there. But I just remember a lot of those. My dad and I were talking the other day about one of our memories. After one of the Reds games we went to, they opened it up and you could go down there and get autographs. And he and I were just somehow we remember going down there on that AstroTurf. And if you remember back they had those cookie cutter stadiums. Like, I mean, you're familiar with one, I'm sure. They had the one in Philadelphia and then the one in Pittsburgh and then the one in Cincinnati. Three Rivers and Riverfront and all that the Vet and all that.
The Vet, yeah.
And I remember walking on that turf, and I'm like, you thought you were walking on a sidewalk, like a concrete sidewalk. I mean, it was hard. I'm thinking, how do guys play sports on this? And it was really hot as well. But just those memories of my dad growing up, just thinking of dad and I listening to, because you remember back when I was a kid, it's way before Ryan's, probably, I don't know if it was like this for you, but for me, growing up, the Reds weren't on TV a lot, even in Ohio. We always listen to games. They were on the weekends, but we'd listen to games, on 700 WLW and taking box score. Dad and I listen to games together and stuff like that. And those are always my memories of just things like that, just doing family things. And of course, I'll never forget the first time he and I went to a game together, a Notre Dame game together. It was 2007. We went to the Notre Dame USC game. And I've shared this one before too. Obviously I had a great one with my wife in 2007 as well. Later that year, my wife and I went to the Duke game together. And so I'll always have that as well. But yeah, just all those things. But most of my favorite sports memories of my dad were my dad umpired high school baseball when I was a kid, and just being in the car going to and from the game with him and just, talking sports and talking baseball and watching him do that. My dad took it real seriously too. Like he always made sure his shirt was ironed and, had shined his shoes and all that kind of stuff. He really enjoyed that. But I think for kids, it's just I don't remember like a lot of games. I do remember one time a Cincinnati Reds pitcher got stung by a bee on the mound when we were there. And there was apparently some like hive thing broke out and he got stung by a bee. But I don't really remember a lot of the games. I just remember being with my dad and being with my mom and dad and just enjoying those memories. I couldn't tell you anything about whether or not the Reds won or lost games. I just remember being with my dad and just enjoying those memories. So those are ones for me.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of the sports memories with my dad is the first game we ever went to was actually a college game. It was Temple against Virginia Tech. It was Michael Vick, Virginia Tech back then. And I remember going to that game. I remember that for the Temple was actually playing Virginia Tech really tough in the first half. And then the game ended like 62-6 or something like that. Virginia Tech won. So it was not a pretty football game. The best moment I probably have ever had with my dad at a sporting event, though, was my first Notre Dame game was actually with my wife. We took the trip to South Bend. But then my dad went with me, I think in like 2019, I believe, if I remember correctly, was the first game. And I just remember like seeing my dad just kind of walk around Notre Dame for the first time, because he had never been to South Bend before. That was the first time ever. And he's been a Notre Dame fan his entire life, and he never got a chance to go to South Bend. So like that was kind of cool, just watching him just kind of be there, kind of do the grotto and see the Golden Dome for the first time and see Touchdown Jesus and like all that stuff. So that was really cool. My thing that me and my mom have in common the most is our NFL allegiance. We're both diehard Rams fans. It was St. Louis, obviously now it's LA, but I remember the Rams winning the Super Bowl in the 99 season, the 2000 with Kurt Warner and the greatest show on turf. My mom was a Rams fan since the 70s. So like she had never seen a championship, with her team, and seeing the greatest show win the Super Bowl there was pretty awesome. Pretty awesome.
Ryan, what's the connection there? Is she from St. Louis?
No, she thought Vince Ferragamo was really cute growing up, and that was it.
There you go.
Yeah,
there you go.
Quarterback for the Rams when he went to the Super Bowl against the Steelers in like the late 70s. He thought he was really cute. So
Archer will appreciate this one, Ryan. The first college football game I ever went to was an Ohio State game with my dad. It was in 1989. It was Ohio State and Wisconsin. I think it was 89 in Columbus, because obviously we were close to Columbus, but my dentist, who was also his son was in my grade, David Flack, and he was also our 5th grade basketball coach, but he had season tickets to Ohio State, and he wasn't going to this one particular game again. And this was right before Barry Alvarez got hired. So they were bad. I mean, they were terrible. Wisconsin was. But he gave me tickets to that. Me and my dad went. I remember having you remember those really hot mugs that truck drivers would have and stuff like that. My mom got us one of those with hot cocoa because it was really cold. It was late in the year. And that was a lot of fun. But I always remember that. Yeah. So you Ohio State fans, there you go. My first college football game was to an Ohio State game. So there you go.
Then he learned about good football. So
exactly right. No, I was a Notre Dame fan.
Yeah.
I had already been a Notre Dame fan, but we just never went to one of those.
We had a question from Rob Osgood. What's up, Rob? Next steps for Notre Dame. The upcoming game, I would love to see the starters for a half and then the young guys in the second half. Depth is key, and those live game reps will pay off. Your opinion? Talked about that a little bit, but there's validity to it. Rob, I don't think you sacrifice the starters reps if there's not playing good football, though, right? I think in your theory, it's like Notre Dame starters ball out for a half, dominate. They're up 49 to nothing, right? And then it's second half, young guys go after it, right? And if that happens, be very, very up for that one. There's no doubt. Creating depth is a big key, I think, for this next game, especially.
Yep, agree.
We had David Lowe. What's up, David? He said, so is it true?
He said it is true. He's saying it is true.
So it is true. Tommy Reese tried taking Sam Hartman with him to Alabama. He just said Bama reached out to him along with Auburn and Florida. This is
that's not accurate, David.
Yeah.
He said that Bama reached out amongst other teams. That was before he picked Notre Dame.
Yes.
He did not say that after he came to Notre Dame, Bama tried to get him to go to Alabama. That's not what he said.
Yeah.
He said he was talking about Bama as something that was an early option, early interest at the very beginning. So look, I know that we like to just kick Tommy Reese and talk trash about Tommy Reese and all that kind of stuff. Tommy Reese did not try to get Sam Hartman to go with him. He couldn't get him to go. He was already at Notre Dame.
That's tampering.
So that just wasn't going to happen. And so I can assure you that Tommy Reese's goal was for Tyler Buckner to go there to add competition to that room, not to get Sam Hartman. That ship had already sailed. So I look, there are plenty of things that we can rightly be critical of Tommy Reese for. Let's not invent stuff. That's not what was said.
And I would say it too, Brian, if it was the way that David was portraying it, it would be a much bigger conversation right now, because that means that all those schools would have tampered with Sam Hartman while he was already a part of the Notre Dame football team. And that would have been a much bigger story.
Right. And that's not what he was saying.
Right.
It's not what he was saying.
We had Berkey03 who says, who or how do you see Notre Dame replacing Gabriel Rubio with?
Well, number one, I think you'll see Jason Onye play a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Another guy that I think we'll see a little bit more of this week is Donovan Heinisch. I think that's something that we'll see a little bit more of. I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit of Aiden Kana'ana And I'm hoping in the second half we get a chance to see a little bit of Tyson Ford if he's playing inside. I don't know if he's even playing inside now.
Maybe some
but
Devin Houston if he's
yeah,
ready to
be
go.
nice.
Maybe.
Be nice.
Yeah.
But I think we'll see. Like, if Notre Dame does what they're supposed to do, I think they're going to empty the bench in the fourth quarter of this game. Get all those freshmen playing time. We'll see Boubacar. We'll see Armel Mukum. We'll see all those guys. Because this is one of those. Yeah,
I want to see Armel running around, man.
This is one of those games that you kind of check a box. You know, you get all you anticipate before the season as you plan out your red shirt strategy. This is one of those games we know we're going to get some kids in there.
Agree.
Yeah, you plan on that one.
Yep. We had Jacob Hayden who said, with this being a lower level opponent, is it frowned upon for them to come out and take shots downfield and take advantage of the mismatches? No. Still play a ball, man.
Ryan, if it's 45-0 at halftime and you come out with your starters and you run 4 verts the first, okay, guys, you've proven your point, right? But early on, no, you run your offense. I mean, this isn't like
also not playing like this isn't like a Notre Dame versus a D3 school, by the way, as well, right? It's like if Tobias Merriweather's taking a shot against Bryce Phillips, like that's a good matchup. Like that's their best player. You know what I mean? Like
Ryan, this isn't an 18-year-old playing basketball with his 5-year-old brother, right? Like these are scholarship football players. They signed up to play this game. You go play the game. What I don't want to see is them coming out in the second half with the start. Now, notice I said starters. If you come out in the second half and you've got your 2s in and you want to run your offense, and that includes taking some shots, take your shots, right? There's playing football, and then there's just purposely trying to humiliate an opponent. Yes. I'm not a big fan of the humiliation. Don't put your backups in there and run a reverse throwback, type of thing, right? Don't throw a screen and then he pulls up and throw. What are we doing? You're not going to do that against Ohio State. So what are you doing that now with your number 2s against Tennessee State? But when Steve Angeli gets in the game, do I want to see Steve Angeli running the offense? Yes. Does that mean throwing the football on first down? Absolutely. Well, you've got to get that kid some experience. He's practicing hard. He's doing what he needs to do. If Kenny Minchie gets in the game, same thing. Yeah. Those old linemen deserve a chance to get to pass block. Braylon James deserves a chance to get the ball thrown to him if he's getting in there in the second half. Rico Flores, those guys. So, yeah, I'm a big believer that you run your offense. You put your number 2s in the game and you ask them and you let them run the offense. There are lines you can cross, but just running your core offense, including throwing the football, is not. And even if you want to take a shot, somebody will tell, hey, Steve, even if the guy's open and the read tells you to go deep, don't go deep. No, that's no, you don't do that. Yeah. I just say you're not purposely trying to humiliate a team. Having Sam Hartman out there when it's 45-0 in the third quarter, running 4 verts, throwing bombs. I'm sorry, that's not. That's running trick plays. That's running it up. That's humiliating a team. Just running your offense. Our job is to run our offense. Your job is to stop it. Right. I put my backups in. What else you want me to do?
All right. But if it's 14-0, Notre Dame is leading with 6 minutes left in the first quarter, like you can still take a shot, man. Like you still have the whole
right. You want to run a trick play there? Fine, go for it. It's your ones versus their ones early in the game. You want to give Ohio State, NC State something to think about. That's fine. Yep. But you don't put your backups in to do exactly, Ryan. It could be 21-0 in the first quarter, or second quarter. You're running your offense. You're running your offense until you take your starters out, and then you're still running your offense with your number 2s. And if you're going to come up and play number 1, guess what? I'm throwing the ball down the field. That's what I'm doing. That's my offense. Like I've never like you'll hear coaches complain about, why are they throwing the ball in the fourth quarter? You had 9 in the box.
Sure.
You don't want them to throw the ball on you. Don't put 9 in the box to stop the run. Like isn't that hard? So yeah, it's always been kind of funny.
You had another question from Andre Tonsel. What's up, Andre? Thank you for your insight into the Navy game. I look forward to the next 12 to 15 weeks of your preparation to help us understand what we can expect. Thank you. Go IB, go Irish Nation.
Thank you, Andre. Appreciate that. I'm looking forward to that as well. I'm hoping we have 13 more games to cover, including this one. That's my hope.
Would be incredible.
Yes, it would.
Connor Laws says, I still think the Sam Hartman doubts were valid for the most part. Completely different offense, but after week 1, it should put a lot of the rest with the performance he had in a pro-style offense.
I don't agree with either one of those. Here's the deal. If you had that significant doubts, one game against Navy, who had one of the worst pass defenses in college football last year, should not answer your questions.
Sure.
Like if you're gonna say the first part, then you can't look at a game against Navy, who Drew Pine. Hey, reminder, folks. Last year when Notre Dame played Navy, Drew Pine threw for more yards than Sam Hartman threw for against Navy, and threw for the same amount of touchdowns, I believe, as Sam Hartman did against Navy. I don't think I'm saying anything out of line here, Ryan. That's, I believe, a factual statement. So you're talking about a team now. We had a lot of respect for Navy's rush defense. And that was, to me, the most impressive part of what we saw on Saturday. Now, I'm not saying Drew Pine played as well as Sam Hartman. He didn't, but he threw for 269 yards and 4 touchdowns. Notre Dame had 35 points at halftime again in the game last year.
Yep.
Right? So what does that tell us? That, okay, Drew Pine can shred a bad Navy pass defense as well. I don't think that should have put anything to rest if you had doubts about Sam Hartman coming in. Right. If you thought he was pretty good, then you should be confirmed by it. The other part is, I don't think doubts about Sam Hartman are what people should have were valid. The guy has had 12,967 passing yards and 110 touchdowns in a Power 5 offense. And this notion that it was a completely different offense, it wasn't. It was a different offense. He wasn't running the triple option. He wasn't running, this really, oop-de-oop. You know what I mean? Like, he's not doing that. They had different techniques of how that mesh would impact it. But a lot of the pass concepts that they were throwing were similar in some different things. There were some technical things he needed to change, but he wasn't changing how he reads a defense. He wasn't changing the formations he's going to line up in. He wasn't, changing as much as I think people were making it out to be. That's why I didn't think there was going to be that big of a transition. I just wanted to see him work out some of the technical stuff that would kind of, and Marcus Freeman talked about this after the game. Like, we needed to work out some of the, Sam would still kind of ride that mesh into the line in the spring game and all that. And you're trying to work some of that stuff out of him. But look, the balls he was throwing on Saturday that he hit on Saturday, guys, I can show you Wake Forest film where he hit every single one of those throws at Wake Forest. He's just doing it. He's getting to it differently now from a footwork and a formational standpoint. He's doing it under center now. That's a difference. That to me, that's the big thing is, Ryan, we saw Sam Hartman get under center, run a play action pass and throw a touchdown pass. Right. All right, cool. We also saw him go under center and be late getting a ball downfield for what should have been another touchdown pass. That's going to be part of the evolution, but I don't think it's this way different offense from what they ran before. I don't think it's that dramatic.
The only thing that I was curious about seeing was his comfort under center, because that was something that he wasn't really asked to do at Wake Forest. Cool. I hated that headline. It was like a week before the game. People were like, it was like these anonymous coaches around college football that are like, oh, we don't know what Sam Hartman's going to look like in that type of offense.
So stupid.
Guys, what are we doing, man? Like, what are we doing?
Connor, I'm not saying that about your question. I'm responding to specifically the thing from on ESPN with like, we don't know that he can drop back and throw the football. That was the stupid comment. That's not what Connor said. But that ESPN article, we don't know that he can drop back and throw. I'm like, guys, I could show you 50 touchdown passes in his career where he dropped back. Like, they have this thing like every throw was like off of the slow mesh and then a quick throw off of it. Like, it's like, guys, he did some of that, but there was plenty of throws where Sam Hartman was dropping back and throwing dimes down the field. I mean, I actually started to put a highlight tape together, and I was like 8 plays in 2 games, and I was like, dude, this is such a waste of my time. It's a stupid comment, and I'd done BC and Florida State. That's it. That's all I'd broken down. And I wasn't even done with the Florida State game yet, Ryan. And I had like 8 plays of just like dimes that he had thrown out of just catch, drop, read, throw. Right. So I just felt that stuff was overplayed, in my opinion.
Sure was.
I really did.
Sure was. We had It's a Good Day Because I'm Not BK. That's a great name. Mailbag, would you rather have Notre Dame schedule a top-level FCS team or a bottom-feeder FBS team?
It depends on what your purpose is of the game. Yeah. If your purpose is we're trying to kind of schedule a W during a part of the season where it's a get-right game, we know we're going to get some depth guys in, then I'd rather play a bottom-feeder FBS team over most FCS teams. If I'm looking to be challenged, for example, Notre Dame would learn a lot more about themselves, in my opinion, if they played North Dakota State in 2 weeks than Central Michigan.
Sure.
They would learn a lot more about themselves in 2019 if they'd have played North Dakota State instead of Bowling Green or New Mexico. Right? I mean, North Dakota State's got wins in recent years over Iowa, Kansas State, I mean, we've seen James Madison before they jumped up. James Madison goes from FCS to D1 and goes 8-3 in their first year at the FCS level. Some of those teams would be solid top 50 caliber Power 5 teams, in my opinion. If you're trying to be challenged, I honestly think that you might be better off there because some of those teams are going to be really well coached. The talent may not be elite, but they're really well coached and they have enough elite talent where, App State going and beating Michigan several years ago. So that was during a period of time where App State was winning championships consistently at the FCS level, right? Didn't they have 2 back then around that time, Ryan?
Yeah.
So
with Armani Edwards as quarterback.
Oh yeah. That team is going to challenge you a lot more than Bowling Green was going to before, other than the urban years, right? So it depends on what you're looking for. If I'm looking for an easy W, give me Bowling Green, give me some bottom feeding FBS team as opposed to a good FCS team. Sure. And now if the question was, Ryan, would you rather play a bottom feeder FBS team or a team like Tennessee State?
Right.
What my answer would be, I'd rather play a bad MAC team than play Tennessee State. Just if it was up to me.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I think the conversation actually is more like, would you rather play a bad FCS team or a better FCS team, right? Like that's my biggest thing is if we're playing an FCS team, I would rather them play a little bit better of a team. I'm not saying North Dakota State necessarily, but I'm saying like,
Ohio State's playing Youngstown next week. Right. Like that's an example.
Northern Iowa, like someone good, it's still a good team. I mean, even at Jacksonville State before they moved up this year,
play a local one,
something like that.
Yeah, there at least have some sort of local connection. Indiana State, hey, you're playing an in-state school.
Yeah,
that would be the only other exception to it. But yeah, like I wouldn't want Notre Dame to play like Eastern Illinois. They're terrible. Yeah. Like, what are you going to get out of that game? Nothing. Like you're literally better doing an inter-squad scrimmage. Seriously.
Yeah. Or go out and play one of the Pioneer League teams that they don't even have scholarships for their players.
Valpo.
Like,
right. Yeah. Exactly.
PK with the question, will Tobias Merriweather break through with a couple catches this week? It seems Greathouse has the knack to find the open territory on the field.
So these are 2 different questions I take him as. I hope so. I hope Tobias gets going. They're going to need him.
This should be the confidence building game, hopefully.
Yeah, they're going to need him. And Greathouse has a knack for finding the open territory in the field.
Does.
He does.
Sure does.
I still will say this, Ryan. The touchdown was great, but Jaden's going to have to learn that worked against Navy. You better snap that top end off better against Ohio State, against Clemson, against USC, against Duke, against NC State. He just kind of drifted to the middle, and Sam threw a great ball, and he was going against an inferior defensive player. You try running that route against some kids at NC State, they're stepping in front of that ball maybe and knocking it down or picking it off. Like you better do a better job on your top end of getting separation. And that's the stuff as a coach that you got to look at and say, hey, great job against this team, or great result against this team. But hey, man, let's get in the film room and let me show you why that route can't be how you run it next time. When we go down to Raleigh, I need you to play this, to run this top end better. And that goes down to, Ryan, what I've always said is it's the result can't be the thing that determines your takeaway from a particular play. Because you talked about it earlier. Yeah, you did this where you had a bad release and you didn't stack the guy and you did all this. You just mossed him because he's not nearly as good as you. Yeah, that's great today, but guess what? That doesn't work in 2 weeks in NC State next week, or in 3 weeks against Ohio State, or against, that's the whole point is, does it translate? And so I'll say is that there were some things that worked on Saturday that you say, hey, you got to be sharper with that. But that's kind of what I like to see, Ryan, because they didn't play a perfect game. They didn't really play anywhere close to a perfect game, and they dominated. Some of y'all might be taking this as like, why are you being critical? No, as a coach, this is a great thing. You don't want to we peaked in week 1. We peaked. Can't play any better than this. There's a lot of stuff that can still clean up. And when you just destroyed a team like the way that you did, and what's funny is, Ryan, the one time Notre Dame got a short field, they didn't score.
I know.
Their drives were all like drives. I mean, they put drives together. The one time they got a ball in deep in Navy territory, they ended up missing a field goal. So it was a great performance in that regard. The thing I was excited about is, boy, there's a lot to still improve upon, which is good, because that means this team can still get better and better and better. And that's kind of a scary thought if they're able to do that. because they were pretty darn good in week 1. They really were.
They were. And I love Jaden Greathouse's commentary when they asked him. I think, well, it was the mic'd up thing on the sideline or whatever, where he was just like, I made my release. I got past the kid real quick. And he's like, I've never seen green grass like that in my life. I'm like, yeah, pretty much, man.
Yeah.
Just ran to green grass, man.
Yep.
Adam Shipley, what's the biggest difference you notice game plan wise with Parker compared to a Tommy Reese game plan? Didn't feel like Reese had the best plan against an inferior team.
What I liked about the game plan and what was unique, and this isn't better or worse, I just focus on the difference. I thought Notre Dame found more ways to go at Navy in this game. That was the thing I was most impressed by. They ran 4 run plays in this game. That's it. They ran inside zone. They ran duo. They ran counter with the counter heavy, and they ran 1 power play. That was on the 1 yard line. They ran power out of 13 personnel with an extra offensive lineman on the field. That's it. They did it a lot of different ways, right? They got to the inside zone and do a lot of different ways, but they had those runs. They didn't run a lot of different runs, but they had so many more counters off of it. Where last year they'd spend so much time thinking of all these different ways to run the same play. And it's like, that's great, but what are your counters off of it? What are you using? What are you using those things to then set up other opportunities? And they never did that. Just the different ways they beat the blitz. I mean, they beat the blitz with runs. They beat the blitz with perimeter screens out of the backfield, quick hitting perimeter screens to receivers. We remember the Deion Colsey tunnel, but remember, Ryan, they had a 19-yard gain on a tunnel, I think, in the first quarter to Jaden Thomas on that same concept. They did it with snag routes. They did it with option routes. They did it with seam routes. They did it with Max Pro. They just attacked Navy's weaknesses in so many different ways, Navy's strength in so many different ways that they were just ahead of Navy the whole game. And guys, I know that it's Navy, but this is a staff that knows how to go at you with the blitz. They do. And so for them to be able to have the success that they did, going at them the way that that to me was the biggest thing, is just having a staff that was able to just be so ahead of an opponent and attack them in so many different ways, not with a million different plays, but just getting into those plays, the timing of when to call certain things, I thought was excellent. I was very, very impressed by that. Jim Halloran asks, is there a tendency concern to get sloppy in technique when the talent level gap is so large? There can be, Jim. It depends on the team. Some teams are a little bit less mature. They don't necessarily have the same focus. And that's why we talked about what we did at the beginning is, look, you're in some of these opponents, and there can be a tendency with certain teams to not be as locked in, not be as focused, maybe not play with the same ferocity, maybe not play with the same consistency, physicality, whatever the case may be. And that's what we're going to learn if this team is that, or if they're a team that says, hey, look, we don't care who the opponent is. We're going to go out there and we're going to play our game of football, and we're going to beat you with our game of football. And I think if they do that, they'll be fine. I think they'll come out and dominate the way that they need to dominate. And we'll find out which one it is. Ray Holcroft says, how critical is it for Steve Angeli to get significant playing time this weekend, and which backup players and position groups need some quality playing time in your opinion? How critical is it? Yeah, look, a game like this, it's more critical than it was last week for Navy, in my opinion. I didn't really have a problem with Notre Dame keeping their starters in a little bit longer. It's game 1. You've got a game the next week that you know you're going to dominate. You're not going to be able to get them a ton of reps. So then you're going into NC State, and your starters have basically played a half, against Navy, and then a half against Tennessee State, and then a half against Navy, 2.5 quarters against Navy, whatever the case may be. And then you're going to NC State, and your guys haven't been able to really play anything close to a full game. Navy was your chance to as much as you could do that, and they took advantage of it. So this week's a little different. This is a much inferior opponent. You've got that other game under your belt. You were able to get your starters to 50 snaps, because if they would have taken them out the second to last series, they would have been in the 40s in snaps. That's it. and they were at least able to get him into the 50s in snaps. This week, you want to have Steve run the offense. Hopefully you get Steve and Kenny Minchie a chance to run it, but definitely you need Steve if he's your backup right now to run it. Other guys that I think it's critical to get playing time if they're healthy. I'd love to see Drake Bowen and Jaden Alsbury get playing time this week. I think it's very important for them to get playing time this week because they're depth players for you. I think it's important, to get Junior Tuihalamaka and Josh Burnham some second half playing time. So even if you go to your second group, I'm still playing those guys. That I think that's an important group. There's some young linemen. I want to get Billy Schrouth a lot of reps this week. The receivers, I think, still it's an opportunity to get some of those guys playing time. Get Rico Flores going, maybe get Braylon James some playing time. And then the last one to me is the secondary. I want to get Thomas Harper a lot more reps this week since he didn't get to play a lot last week. I think we'll see more nickel out of Notre Dame this week than we saw out of Notre Dame last week. I think that's going to be an important part of it. So there's just things like that to me that are going to be very important pieces to Notre Dame being able to get rocking and rolling moving forward. And that's part of that building depth thing that we talked about at the beginning, Ray, is, that's an important piece. Donovan Heinisch. I want to get Donovan Heinisch a lot of reps in this game. I don't really care that Howard Cross, if I could get away with Howard Cross only playing 10 to 15 reps in this game, I would do it in a heartbeat. Because you know who Howard Cross is. Do you really need him to do anything against Tennessee State? No, I want him healthy. I want Riley Mills healthy. So if Riley has like 2 good series to start the game off with, I'd pull him, honestly, and say, okay, yeah, you did your thing. Let's get somebody else some work and get you healthy for next week against NC State.
Sure. Well, Brian, I think also on like on that conversation note, right? It's like Gabriel Rubio played really well week 1, right? Really well. But I've always talked about this, the differences between the Notre Dames over past years and the Georgias, for instance, the Alabamas in their heyday, is they could just throw waves at you, right? And all due respect, Gabriel Rubio is a real good football player, and I love that he's a part of the rotation more, especially this year. But if a Georgia lost to Gabriel Rubio, there would be another Gabriel Rubio coming up right after him. You know what I'm saying? Like they would have that depth piece that's the uncommon part of their game. So you need to be able to create that depth, because if you lose a Gabriel Rubio, a guy like a Heinisch, Donovan Heinisch, needs to come in and be able to give you valuable reps. If that's him, if that's Tyson Ford, if that's, one of Devin Houston, like whoever it is, you need to be able to create that depth. And I think that this is a perfect opportunity to create depth if you're Notre Dame. So I think that is a significant opportunity that Notre Dame has this week. And, but it's a great question, Ray. Absolutely great question. So Bobby S. said, I saw what Nolan's mom put on Facebook. Do you expect him to play this year, special teams, or back in the mix at linebacker?
I hope so, but honestly, right now, as I've said before, until he's officially like back to practicing and a part of the team, my thing is just getting Nolan right. That's all I really care about. And so obviously his mom shared a little bit more light. Now you guys have a little bit more insight on it. Nolan had a surgery, an elective surgery after the spring, and coming out of it, there just were a lot of issues that came up out of it that are still affecting him, and he's just battling back from it. So just praying for the kid and hope that he gets back. I mean, the football part will take care of itself. I just want the kid to be okay. And honestly, I mean, it's Bobby, it's a fair question to ask. A lot of people are excited about Nolan. It's a very fair question to ask. Just for me, I just don't even feel right talking about him in football right now. I just want to make sure the kid's okay. Once we find out he's okay and he's back at it, then we can talk about what he needs to do to get back on the field and what he can or can't provide this year. But it's a fair question. Please don't take me as any way disparaging your question. I'm just giving you my personal opinion. I don't feel right discussing that right now. Ryan, if you do, go for it. But I just want to focus on the kid getting right. That's my priority.
I agree. We lose the human element too much in these conversations. And I agree.
And again, Bobby, it's a fair question because I know, like I said, I know a lot of people were excited about Nolan. So please don't take my comment to say your question isn't fair. I'm just saying for me and my answer, I'd rather just say, hey, look, let's just get the kid right first, and then we'll figure out that other stuff out.
Bobby S. says, what's the latest with Gerby, Lamberts, and do you expect a commitment in the next few weeks? Man, if I had a dollar for every time someone asked me about Gerby Lambert on the message board or on the podcast, I would be a rich person at this point. Obviously, I'm joking, Bobby. I know it's a fair question. Look, we have made a statement that we believe Notre Dame is still in a very good spot with Gerby Lambert. They have been for several weeks, for a couple months, actually, if we're being completely honest with ourselves. We expect that a decision will be coming sometime in the near future before his season starts. I think some people kind of misunderstood the before the season starts as before Notre Dame season starts. No, his first game is the 7th of September. So I would expect that a decision would be made before his senior season officially kicks off. So a couple more weeks
maybe
here, folks. Actually, a little bit over a week.
Maybe.
I still don't think it's going to go to this season. But
I think there's a difference between a decision and an announcement, and I'll just leave it at that.
Sure.
Right. And we've said that this is a different kind of kid, and how we think he should handle it may not be how he cares to handle it. So I'll just say this. I'm not worried about that. I feel very good about where Notre Dame stands. And if I don't, I'll let y'all know. I promise. So, yeah.
Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker, says the linebackers having a great first game and hopefully season. How much, in your opinion, would go to Max Bulla? I think he was a great hire for Notre Dame. Thank you again for everything you all do.
I don't think you can take away that. I mean, he's basically the de facto linebackers coach. And so if the linebackers played well, I think he deserves credit for that. If they'd have played poorly, I would have said, hey, he didn't get them ready to play. I think it's twofold. I think, having a linebackers coach with just more experience as a coach, there's no disputing James Laurinaitis' football knowledge, Ryan. But you also know that there's a big difference between being knowledgeable and knowing how to impart knowledge. That 100%. Can sometimes come with a little bit of time. And so that's kind of where he's got to get to. But Max Bulla has more of that. He coached with Nick Saban for 2 years. But I also think that we need to give Al Golden some credit for that too, because the plan was very sound. And the linebackers knew exactly where to go. Now, they didn't always do what they were supposed to do when they got there. That's part of the game. But the linebackers were confident in what they were supposed to do. That was not the case last year. And so he gets credit for that too. And he spends a lot of time with the linebackers in practice as well. So I think both of them, I think they work well together. I'll say that right now, at least for one game and what we've seen in practice. I'm a lot more confident that they're going to be prepared to play at a higher level this season than what we saw last year. In my view.
Yeah, I've been impressed just in a vacuum with Max Bulla so far. Because, I mean, to your point, Brian, like a lot was on his plate when he first got here, right? Yeah. It's like linebacker group needed to play better from last year. You're the guy that's kind of the missing piece, right? To hopefully get them moving in a better direction along with Al Golden. And also he came right in the midst of the Kingston Viliamo Asa recruitment too. And it's just like, you got to go get that kid, man. Help us out. Like you got to impress that family really quickly. And judging by his mother's conversation with me the other day on the podcast, Max Bulla had a big role and really cleaned that family very shortly, right? So he needs credit for helping to land Kingston, the biggest recruit in the class for Notre Dame from the linebacker position. And also he needs a lot of credit because the linebackers seemed like they were better prepared and more technically sound than they were last year, which is good so far.
Agree.
Next question is from D-Troll Hunter, who says, I kind of think of Navy could be, let me replace. I kind of think Navy could be competitive at the FCS level. And with the new blocking rules, I think they will not be able to compete again seriously at the FBS level.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think if they run it right, because here's the thing, it hasn't stopped Air Force from being pretty good.
Air Force has been really good, man. Troy Calhoun is one of the most underrated coaches
Top
in college
5
football, man.
Easily.
He's a very good coach.
Yes.
Very good coach.
And I would argue this. He plays in a very competitive league as well. We don't talk about the Mountain West anymore.
Yeah.
Because some of the bigger names aren't in it, but that's still a good league. And you're talking about a team that in the last 4 years, they've won 11, 10, and 10 games. The only year they didn't win that many games was the COVID year. They went 3-3. They've won their last 4 bowl games. So Air Force is a good football team. They are. The issue with Navy is not 2021, Ryan, they beat a really good San Diego State team. Remember that?
Yep.
That was the year San Diego State won 12 games. Air Force beat them that year. They beat Louisville in a bowl game that year. They beat Boise State on the road that year. They're an option team. Now, they do their option differently. But they beat Baylor last year, Ryan. They smacked Baylor in a bowl game, beat Colorado by 31, and destroyed Northern Iowa, a really good FCS team last year. So, look, I think the issue isn't the rules. I think the issue is that Navy just has not been able to, for whatever reason, get the right quarterback. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. And this has been true for a while. Go look at the period in between Keenan Reynolds and Ricky Dobbs. Wasn't a great Navy period. It wasn't. And so, to me, Ryan, that's the key. They've never been a team, they've got to do a better job getting players and things like that. And all that's true. But like you look at 2009 and 2010, they were 19 wins in 2 years with Ricky Dobbs. Same staff the next year, they went 5-7 because they didn't have a very good quarterback. The next year they were 8-5, and then what helped them? They started the season 1-3. What helped them that year? They made a change of quarterback, right? And then you go out to 2013, and all of a sudden they're a good football team again. Why? Said Keenan Reynolds. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you go 2018, Navy stunk again. You remember how bad they were in 2018? They were not good at all. Like at all. And then 2019, they came out. Let's just actually look specifically. 2018, they went 3-10. They were not good. And they weren't very good at quarterback. They had this kid at slot back that was really dynamic. The next year, they made the decision that they honestly should have made at the beginning of the year before, and they put Malcolm Perry at quarterback. And the next year, they went out and went 11-2. Their only losses that year, Ryan, were at Memphis and at Notre Dame. That's it.
Yeah.
And Memphis that year was 12-2. Played Penn State in the Cotton Bowl.
Malcolm Perry was one of those rare slot backs that went like over 1,000 yards too. Like he was a rare athlete for that system.
He was legit. I mean, so it really does come down to that. Like their fullback's pretty good. Their offensive lines, it's not a great Navy offensive line, but it's not bad. Their receivers aren't as good as they were like in that Jamar Tillman era, but this is kind of what they normally have at receiver. The difference is they don't have a Ricky Dobbs, Keenan Reynolds, Malcolm Perry at quarterback. That's what it comes down to. And the difference is, in my opinion, Ryan, because Navy runs so much veer, the way that they do it, they're more dependent on the quarterback run. Army's more of a midline team. They're not as dependent on the quarterback run. They're more of a fullback pitch type of option team. Air Force is a completely different type of offense. And so those are all aspects of it that to me make it different, where Air Force doesn't need a quarterback that's Keenan Reynolds, Malcolm Perry, Ricky Dobbs. Right. They are a team that can go from really bad to really good in 1 year with a change of quarterback. That's it. And we've seen that happen. And so I think that's what's missed. And do the new rules impact them? I think so. But I think the biggest thing hurting Navy is what we talked about. It's the quarterback. Like I'll say this, Ryan, there was a few plays that if they had a Malcolm Perry quarterback on Saturday would have gone big. It's just a different animal. It really is.
But I would agree with D. Troll in the sense that they would be not only very competitive on the FCS level, they would be a very good team on the FCS level consistently. So
absolutely.
They would be Kennesaw State, but better, in my opinion.
I just think they can still be a good FBS opponent. I think the biggest, I think the biggest change that's hurt Navy, Ryan, I've said this before, it's going to the AAC. That really hurt them because they were pretty good in that league the first couple of years. But the thing about Navy, they've never been in a league before. And so now there's a book on them that's a little easier to decipher. And it's been harder for them to win games because now there's a consistency year after year. There's going to be some opponents they just play more. It used to be, Ryan, they'd go for 10 years and the only teams they'd play more than, 2-3 times is Notre Dame, Air Force, and Army. That's it. I mean, so I think that's had a bigger impact on anything else, in my opinion.
Which is kind of interesting because we just used Air Force as like the standard for option teams, and they are in a conference that hasn't hurt them much.
But that's the thing is how they do it is so much different. Because there's so much more versatility to how Air Force runs. I mean, they'll go shotgun. They'll like some of the stuff that Navy's now trying to do. And Air Force has been doing. they've been running power read for years, Ryan. I mean, they've implemented some spread concepts into their triple option, which to me makes them a lot harder to defend, in my view. There's more things they can do to beat you. Where when Ryan and I talked about you take the fullback out, Navy can't beat you. I mean, they just can't. You can take the fullback out against Air Force and still give up 250 yards rushing because there's so much more they can do. And I think Navy's going to try to get there with Chestnut. It's just going to take some time. And they're going to have to figure out and let's not also forget the guy that won the starting quarterback job for them in the spring didn't play in this game. He was suspended because of an academic situation. So they didn't play Notre Dame with their best quarterback either. So just some things. Do I think they're going to be a 10-11 win team every year again? They need a Malcolm Perry to do that. But I still think they can be competitive at the FBS level.
We had a question from I got a message from this person. Brian is civil engineer.
Okay,
civil eng.
All right.
Not a question. Just wanted to thank you guys for your hard work and great podcast. I'm going through a super stressful work week, and your daily podcasts have been a good relief.
I'm glad we could help you through that. Absolutely.
Civil engineering does sound like a very stressful job.
Yes.
So
a little bit more than talking about Notre Dame, Tennessee State. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I would say so.
And we want you to be good at your job. There's no doubt about that. So we'll do our best to help you get through it. So let's last couple here, Ryan, and then we're gonna get up out. Actually, let me just make sure there's no super chats that have come in since. So just so you all understand, the issue is why Ryan and I keep going out is we're kind of tag teaming, going in and out, because basically StreamYard is jacked up today and it's not adding any new chats
since we're in here. Yeah.
So like right now, my most recent chat or my comment is 312. Now, when I look at the live chat on the, like I'll have over here open, like I have our show open, I'm seeing like a bunch of new comments that we don't have. So when we leave and come back, it shows an updated thing, but then it doesn't add new ones from the minute we get back. So that's why we've been going.
It also doesn't tell me how many people are in here anymore live, which is weird.
So, yeah, I don't see that either.
Anymore.
Yeah, it's just StreamYard. We're gonna have to have some conversations about whether or not StreamYard's the way that we're gonna continue to go. But yeah, it's what we're doing for now. So let's get to this question from David, and then we're gonna wrap up with one more question after that.
Sounds good. David Lowe's question: do y'all guys think that the new clock benefits our offense since we have the ability to run 5 deep backs?
I don't know. I mean, part of me wants to say I would like more plays with 5 deep backs.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like I want more opportunities to get those guys touches, not less. Right.
Sure.
But I mean, if anything, David, I would say that the new clock rules would help you more if you had less depth, because you could just kind of, go a slower paced team and just milk the clock and get first downs and shorten the game. So, yeah.
I do think that it could help you, David, in a situation where if you're playing a really good football team, right, and you want to shorten the game a little bit, I think you would have the option to do that if you have the ability to run the football consistently. Yeah. It could, right? But I think in most cases, I do agree with Brian that, like, I don't think shortening the game is a necessity for Notre Dame all the time, right? Like that's a Navy thing as far as like you're not as talented as that team. Right. You want to shorten the game. But if Notre Dame wanted to play at a slower pace and work the clock a little bit, and yes, I think the depth at running back could help because you're going to be probably more consistently be able to run the football because you're going to be able to try out strong legs consistently.
Here's the problem. If that's your goal, you have a couple guys on there that are game breakers.
Sure.
Put Jarian Price and Jeremiah Love in there to milk the clock. And I'm not saying David said that. And that's kind of the interesting thing, though, Ryan, is like, you and I had a very interesting conversation about the talent at running back before the show started. Yes. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like, what having 5 deep at running back, what that allows you to do, and this is what I think is even the better point of what Ryan was making, is you now have the athletes to put on the field against those teams to go toe-to-toe with those teams. Whereas like, hey, I'm not worried about milking the clock. I'm worried about putting Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love in there so we can hit a home run against Ohio State or USC or Clemson, right? And then coming back with my hammer in Audric and Gibran, right? And because that's the thing you saw on Saturday. Audric and Gibran kind of have their style, and it's different, but in the same universe. And then Jadarian and Jeremiah kind of have a little bit of a different deal too, because they're just all about just, what's the expression? All gas, no brakes, right? And I think it's the unique talent that. So I think the 5 backs helps you. I just think what helps you, it helps you not because of the clock rule, but because when you go play Ohio State, you have 4 dudes and a really good veteran at running back. And you've got some depth at running back that can say, hey, look, you put Jadarian Price on the field against Ohio State, not because you're trying to milk the clock, but because you're thinking, if we can open a hole for this guy, he's going to go. You're putting Jeremiah Love in the game, not because you're trying to run the clock. It's because we're going to try to get a crease here behind Blake and Rocco because we want this kid to take it to the house, right? That's what you're trying to do with the specific talent. So if you just get away from just the number of 5 and focus on the specific players we're talking about here, you're putting those guys on the field because they have some juice, not because you're trying to run the clock out, in my view. So it's and we were talking about it, and I won't say what Ryan said, and I agree with him, but he's like, here's the even crazier part. Like next year, you get Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams are going to show up. It's just like, you got to be kidding me.
You might cycle out an Audric Estime for Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams. Your depth might be more crazy next year. Even if you lose a great player like Audric.
Replace Audric and Devin Ford maybe with Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams. And now Jabron's a year older, Jadarian's a year older, Jeremiah Love's a year older. It's nutty. It's really nutty. And then the fastest guy of all of them shows up in 2 years, in Justin Thurman. So
true.
Yeah. We're going to end with this one here, guys. So let's talk a little Buckeyes with this last one.
Blake Sofa says, I just joined and I'm not sure this was talked about. The focus is Tennessee State, but I think it's necessary to discuss quarterback situation at Ohio State. What's your opinion on what's going on?
Well, I think what's going on is you had 2 good quarterbacks competing for a job. One, the older guy won it. The guy that started a game before, the guy that's a little bit more dependable, not as explosive, not as dynamic as Devin Brown, but a more dependable player. And Ryan, to me, when you've got the weapons that they have at Ohio State, I don't need a dynamic player at quarterback. I need a guy that's going to get the ball to my weapons with the right timing and they'll make the right decisions. That's what I think is going on. And I think there's way too many Ohio State fans that are focused on whatever Kyle McCord or Devin Brown did in the spring. I don't care. Do you remember how bad Justin Fields was in his first spring game at Ohio State? Wasn't he like 3 for 14? Something silly like that. I don't care. Do you remember how bad Deshaun Kaiser had one of the worst quarterback performances in the spring game I've ever seen, the year before he led Notre Dame to the Fiesta Bowl after Malik went down in game 2. I just don't care. Kyle McCord knows how to run that offense. He's done it before. He's going to have phenomenal weapons. I think that's what's going on. Now, you also need to make sure Devin Brown is ready, because if Kyle's not ready to be that guy, then you've got a really talented player that you can put in there. I think that's what's going on. I don't think there's anything negative about it. I think there's a lot more being made of this, in my opinion, as if it's some kind of problem than I think that there should be. And the reason that's just my focus on, talking about Ohio State. From a Notre Dame standpoint, I don't care. We're going to have 3 games to figure out what's going on at quarterback for them. That's just not a topic for me. Let's see what Kyle McCord does, right? Let's see what Devin Brown does when he gets in there. But I'm more worried about Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka and Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams and Carnell Tate and Cade Stover. And I'm more worried about those guys than I am whoever's at quarterback. I just know whoever's at quarterback, you need to put him on the ground. That's the thing for me.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded like Kyle McCord was winning the quarterback battle in the spring, and then obviously Devin Brown got hurt down the stretch. But from the sounds of it, sounds this offseason, Devin Brown had cut the gap, and they were kind of going back and forth. And by all indications, everything that we've heard, or at least I've heard, that was a really split kind of quarterback decision. But obviously, Ryan Day opts for Kyle McCord in the first game. I think it'll be interesting to monitor, because I think we all need to remember, just because a guy is named the starter for game 1 does not mean that is over with, right? Because Devin Brown is going to play in that game, according to Ryan Day.
Because what did I say before the show started, Ryan? What was the question I asked you before the game? Is this their dude?
Right, exactly.
Or are they doing what Michigan did last year with Cade McNamara? Starts in game 1, and then JJ McCarthy got game 2, and then Jim was going to do this. We'll decide from there. Well, I remember looking at the game and I'm thinking, well, that's a little unfair, when you look at it, because you're like, game 1 is against Colorado State, who isn't good, but they're not terrible, and then the game 2, I'm talking about defensively. And then game 2, you're playing Hawaii. I'm like, man, Hawaii is terrible on defense. You're letting him play against the worst team that you're going to play all year defensively. We'll find that out. But look, if you're Kyle McCord, you got to look at it like this. I got my chance.
Yep.
Let me go see what I can do. If you're Devin Brown, you're going to say, hey, I'm going to get what I'm curious about is, does Devin Brown press at all? This is what I was getting nervous about in these situations, right? Is Devin Brown going to press when he does get in there? Or are they going to have a package just to say, just be under control. This is what we're going to do with you. Don't feel like you got to go make a play. Because if I'm at all, if I'm in Devin's camp, if I'm like his dad, I'm like, man, I just hope he doesn't go in there and I got this series and I got to go win the job in one series. Don't put that kind of pressure on yourself. Just go play ball.
Did you feel like Malik Zaire did that a little bit with that Deshaun Kaiser situation that he pressed too much?
Well, especially since Deshaun went in there and led them down on a touchdown that very first drive. Now it's like Malik's not just playing against Texas. He's playing against Texas and Deshaun.
Yeah, and then he had like a 3-and-out. And I think Deshaun scored again on the next drive after that. And it was just like,
it was over with. And Malik's and the thing is too, they were running an offense that was geared more towards Deshaun than it was Malik. So it's like it was a rigged game essentially for me. With Devin Brown, are they going to put him in there? Because the thing I keep reading about from Ohio State people and Ryan Day's comments is like Devin Brown brings an athletic element to the table they haven't really had in a few years. Probably since Justin Fields. And there's some excitement about that dynamic ability, big arm, athletic.
I have heard that Ohio State is very high on Devin Brown.
Yeah, because he's the playmaker, but he's not consistent yet. And that's the thing is that's what you got to weigh. Do I need a playmaker or do I need a guy that can just get the ball to my studs? And that's the thing that's kind of weighing a little bit here. So for Devin Brown, it's just do the little things. If you do the little things, that's going to be your shot to do it. But if you're Kyle McCord, same thing for you. Just do the little things. And that's what we're going to find out if he can do or not. But it's going to be interesting, Ryan. Do they really want to be playing musical chairs at quarterback until they play Notre Dame? I don't think so.
Maybe each quarterback will get an offensive coordinator to be his guy in the first couple of games.
Ryan Hartman calls the plays for Devin Brown. And yeah, you're really upset about that, aren't you?
See which pairing works best. I just think it's stupid. I just think it's dumb. Like quarterback battle's cool, position battle's cool. You don't know who's going to call the plays game 1 a week before the game? That doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense at all. What have you been doing all fall camp? Have you just been like one day it's Coach Hartline, the next day it's Coach Day? Like that's just too many voices, man.
It's weird. It's just weird. It doesn't surprise me. I just kind of feel like to a degree, Ryan Day's just kind of
there's no way he's going to give it up.
Doesn't know the answer, and he's just trying to figure out what the answer is. We'll see.
I would be surprised if he gave it to Hartline and didn't have any. I don't know.
If you're Hartline, how do you respond to that? Like not right now. Now you're a good soldier and you do what you got to do. But what are your thoughts in the offseason if you're like, hold on a second? Because if to me, as an outsider, I look and say, well, did he not believe in Hartline? Did he think Hartline couldn't do the job? That's exactly what he's saying. He said he was going to let him take over. I mean, Archer, let me know if I'm wrong on this. I thought the intention was Archer saying that Day said he's going to call plays. So looks like Ryan Day is going to call plays.
Nice.
So it's like, so what does that say to Hartline? You said he was going to run the offense, and now you're doing it. So what that basically says is he wasn't going to do a good job. I didn't believe in him. So
dang, man. Dang. Was that the whole thing with like getting him a raise and everything this offseason to make him the OC? Like, wasn't the whole thing?
Which tells me he never had any intention of doing it. He just did that to make him. He didn't want him to leave to go to Notre Dame, basically, is what it comes down to.
I don't think so either. I don't think so either, man. Yeah.
Yep. That'll be interesting.
That's a weird situation, man. That's how you alienate coaches right there.
Yeah.
Like, that's weird.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah. I'm going to be very curious. This is a big season for Ohio State, man. It really is. I think this team is really talented. I do. There's two trouble spots, two concerns, quarterback and offensive line. But outside of that, man, like they're very talented. I mean, their secondary is not as good as some people make it out to be, but it's still talented. I mean, Denzel Burke's overrated, but he's still good. Lathan Ransom's a good player. If Josh Proctor's healthy, he's a good. And there's other kids battling for those jobs too. I mean, it's not just them.
Apparently, Jihad Carter is going to start at the other safety.
The kid from Syracuse. Yeah, I mean, he's a good football player. They're just none of them are dudes, right? But linebacker, they've got good talent there. The young talent is even better. They're just not as experienced. D-line's got plenty of talent. This is a really talented Ohio State team. It's just, can they put it all together? That's going to be the question. And we're going to find out how important C.J. Stroud really was to that team last year, Ryan. We're going to find that out this year too. Was he really the thing that made it all work, or is it really just a plug-and-play offense like some people think that it is? We're going to find out, because neither one of these guys are C.J. Stroud. And neither one of these guys are Justin Fields and Dwayne Haskins, in my opinion. Not yet. Not this year. They may be down the road. Devin Brown may be down the road. Who knows? But he's not going to be that guy this year, in my opinion. At least I don't think he is. We'll find out. If he is, Ohio State's going to be really good again, which I expect them to be. So anyway, well, that's it, Ryan. Why don't you go ahead and take us out of here, man?
Yeah, we appreciate you all so much, and thank you for dealing with a little bit of the StreamYard tough circumstances, but we thank you all for being great troopers and sticking with us today. Before you leave, if you could please hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, hit that notification bell, share it with your friends. And if you missed our first portion of this podcast where we talked a lot about the Tennessee State matchup, both from the Notre Dame perspective and what Tennessee State brings to the field, make sure to go back and listen to that on any of your favorite podcast platforms. And while you're over there, 5-star reviews are very much appreciated. Boards at irishbreakdown.com. We've been having a lot more features this offseason with the season officially underway. So make sure to go sign up at boards at irishbreakdown.com. And as always, go Irish. From Brian, that's Brian Driscoll. I'm Ryan Roberts. We want to thank you all so much again for joining us today on the Irish Breakdown podcast.